Jordan, are you on?
Somebody yelling at me if I'm on. I've been on.
Are we ready to start, Madam Clerk?
We are.
Okay. I'd like to start this Ordinance Committee meeting of August 18th. Madam Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Here.
Chair Gutierrez.
Present.
Thank you.
Let the minutes reflect that we are all present. Ms. Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are not, no.
Thank you. Okay, now I'd like to open the general comment period. With that being said, I would like to allow Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon to say some remarks before we continue. Ms. Sneddon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Gutierrez. This is unusual to make a statement ahead of time, but I want to be really clear first with an apology for confusion that I have been a part of causing in terms of what's agendized and what's not agendized today. I will say that Councilmember Harmon and myself sent out a colleague policy memorandum, and we did share that with the news media, outlining something that we may want to discuss as a community with public input, with process, with meeting with all stakeholders in the future. And we wanted to give sort of a pre-description of something that may be agendized in the future if there's will for it, and to start the public conversation on it. I think, and I'll apologize for how it has been rolled out, has with this meeting created confusion about what's agendized today. And I want to say that what's before us today has been through a thorough process, through council, through ordinance committees, through public outreach. And that's the type of process that we really value and want to continue. So again, this is the Community Stabilization Initiative is what we've called it. It is a first glimpse of what might be part of a discussion. It is not a drafted ordinance. It has not been through a process. It is not directed by council, and it's not agendized. So I want to say, I think it's an important conversation to have. Today is not the agendized day for that, and it will be a long time with a lot of public input. And so I apologize to the council and also to the public for confusion on that. But I will say that I think it's an important conversation to be having with our whole community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So just to reiterate, this is general public comment on issues that are not on the agenda. So we are discussing and continuing the discussion of just cause eviction today. So anything else you can discuss at this current moment. Ms. Clerk, are there any people willing to speak?
So we have numerous individuals who have raised their hand. I'm going to ask that they lower their hand to speak on items that are not on the agenda. And we will try to get through these to see if in fact they're speaking on items not on the agenda. So the first caller that we have is Stanley Stankoff. I'm gonna unmute you. Give me 1 second. Okay, he's no longer there. JB Allegani. Go ahead and unmute your mic and go ahead, please. Go ahead and unmute your mic, JB Allegani. Okay. We will check back on JB Allegani. Chris Agnali. Chris Agnali, please go ahead.
Guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I've born and raised here in Santa Barbara. I've been a renter for the majority of the past 10 years. I'm also a landlord and a property manager. Past president of the Association of Realtors, past president of the Rental Property Association, and I'm a past member of the Rental Housing Mediation Task Force, which I was on for many years, and I actually chaired that for 2 years. I oppose this ordinance, and in my 30 years of being a property manager, we've never had to evict anybody for ourselves or our clients. Even when we had problem tenants, which there are problem tenants. Just like there's bad landlords, there's bad tenants. Unfortunately, with all this recent talk about rent control, a lot of our owners are asking us to raise rents out of fear of what the future holds. And I'll just ask you guys to consider the unintended consequences of your actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to reiterate, these are comments for items that are not on the agenda. Thank you.
Our next speaker is James Carbone. James Carbone, please go ahead. Hello.
Hello. I'm sorry, I may have gotten confused here. Are you looking for comments on the proposed ordinance or other items at this time?
Other items that are not agendized. So the just cause item is going to come up right after this period. So if you could just wait a few more minutes, you can comment on it then.
I sure will. Sorry for the confusion. I'll lower my hand and re-raise later.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Don Elakanen. Don Elakanen, please go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, I think I want to speak to the just cause issue, so I'm not sure if it's the appropriate time.
Yeah, please.
If you could just wait a few more minutes, this is just general public comment. So if there's anything that's not on the agenda you wanted to comment on, this would be the time. Otherwise, just wait a few minutes. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Mark Melton. Mark Melton, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I also wanted to speak on the just cause. So I guess I'll just wait.
Thank you.
Chair Gutierrez, that was the last speaker for public comment not on the agenda.
Raise your hand.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Can we have the item read to us, please?
Yes. Continuance of proposed ordinance requiring just cause for residential evictions and resolution establishing relocation assistance payments for no-fault just cause evictions. Recommendation that the ordinance committee consider and make recommendations to council on the following matters. A, an ordinance to the council of the city of Santa Barbara amending the Santa Barbara Municipal Code by the addition of chapter 26.50 pertaining to just cause for residential evictions, and B, a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara establishing relocation assistance payments amounts for no fault just cause evictions pursuant to Santa Barbara Municipal Code chapter 26.50.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Now I'd like to continue where we left off last week, which was where we had to cut short public comment for the sake of time. So I'd like to reinstate that, please.
Chair Gutierrez?
Yes, Mr. Colon.
I'd like to make two brief comments. One, I have ready to show, should you need it, the PowerPoint from last week. Secondly, for the benefit of the public, I have reviewed the comment letters that have come in the last few days since the last meeting. And to the extent there are what I would call technical questions about say, what does the definition of tenant mean? I have intentionally deferred addressing those issues until the committee reaches decisions on the policy questions. At that point, I have every intention of fully addressing the technical concerns that are being raised. Where those technical concerns have a policy overlap, I've tried to identify it. So I want the public commenters to understand that, number one, I've tremendously valued those technical comments. Number two, I intend to reciprocate on that effort by including them. And number three, there'll be a chance for the public to see those responses before all of this is finished. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Clerk, can we have our first callers?
Our first caller is Amy Kearns. Amy Kearns, please go ahead.
My name is Amy Kearns, and I am a registered voter. My husband and I own 2 single-family homes as rentals. We take pride in our rentals, and we treat our tenants well. We currently raise the rent 1% each year, but would make it 2% each year going forward if these measures pass. I asked the members of the City Council, what is the objective of this ordinance? To make housing more affordable? Increasing the cost of doing business will increase the cost of rental housing. Let's think about some recent decisions taken by the city regarding real estate in the city. Is the average unit density program decreasing the cost of housing? No. Affordable units are torn down and replaced with market rate units with no limit. The 1200 block of San Andreas is an example where an existing duplex and 3 single-family dwellings inhabited by working families were demolished and replaced by 5 duplexes and 2 single-family dwellings marketed and priced to students. Is the alternate dwelling unit program adding more affordable units or decreasing the cost of purchasing a home? No, a single family home with an ADU rental is now an income property. On the Mesa, many of these ADUs are now vacation rentals. Is it to punish business owners? Implementing these measures puts the responsibility of solving the affordable housing problem on a select group of business people, rental property owners. This is like requiring grocery stores or restaurants to pay for school lunch programs. Both are serious issues, but the solution should be a shared responsibility, not merely the responsibility of a select group of business people. What is the objective? Is it to make a political statement to show how focused you are on tenant rights? To drum up publicity for future runs for office? Is our city attorney doing his job of providing sound legal analysis in his advice? Or is he pandering? There's no legal precedent for tenant-based relocation costs, so this ordinance, if passed, will lead to expensive lawsuits. Win or lose, the cost will be borne by the taxpayers of Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is one of the most desirable places in the world to live, and complaints about the cost of living started in the 1940s. There will never be enough affordable housing for all who wish to live here. City Council members, have you considered creative, common sense solutions like security deposit alternatives, lease insurance, rent guarantees, or short-term no-interest loans for moving costs? Other cities have implemented these measures instead of attempting to punish one set of residents to benefit another set of residents. Cincinnati City Council recently passed an ordinance that allows residents to purchase security deposit insurance instead of handing over 1 month's rent to a landlord. Please think about the long-term effects on your decisions. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lauren Mendel. Lauren Mendel, please go ahead. Lauren Mendel, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Good morning. I am here in support of the proposal to offer protections for renters in support of relocation assistance. I think what we're getting at the heart is a long-standing debate within the United States of America, which is whether or not we put people's lives or people's property first. The last speaker mentioned, like, yes, Santa Barbara is a desirable place to live. It's also a desirable place to work. The city would not be what it is without the labor of a large group of people. The people who work in our restaurants, in the retail shops, the people who maintain the beautiful public spaces that we all enjoy, but these people can't actually afford to live here. When you buy a property and you decide that it's an investment, you are taking on some risk. It's not the city's job to mitigate that risk for investors. You're also saying that because I was in a position to buy this piece of property, that means I am entitled to somebody else's work, somebody else's labor, and the fruits of that labor ad infinitum. We're not just talking about a small group of mom and pop renters. We're talking about very large, well-funded, well-organized companies who are protecting what they have a financial stake in this. The mom and pop renters have taken on a risk, but they do not represent the majority of rental units in the city. The majority of rental units in the city are huge companies that come in, buy up swaths of properties, jack up rents, kick people out, annul leases. So, and we need to get ahead of what's going on with COVID-19. It is going to be a public health disaster if people are out on the streets. Most of the people who are homeless in Santa Barbara were in fact at one time renters. We love to place all of our problems on the head of homeless people here in Santa Barbara, when this is not actually the case. The problems in Santa Barbara mostly stem from the greed of one people forcing themselves on another. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Michelle Roberson. Michelle Roberson, please go ahead.
Thank
Michelle
you.
Roberson.
Thank you. I want to thank the Ordinance Committee and the City Attorney for taking the time and effort to not only draft and review the ordinance, but research the varying laws in place to ask the right questions. As a property provider and a lawyer, I support reasonable relocation expenses for those displaced without cause. The top question I have heard and continue to hear is one that I brought up in my letter, which is included in the supplemental staff report, which relates to whether we are paying each tenant as defined by this ordinance or relocation by the unit. Last week, Councilmember Jordan appropriately asked our city attorney how the state statute reads, and we heard how this ordinance mostly mirrors that statute. Mr. Kalan, who I have a lot of respect for, responded that the relocation benefit per state statute is provided to each tenant. However, as with many laws in place, it comes down to definition, and knowing that while the state statute references tenant, it goes on to say that the property provider could provide 1 month's rent relocation to tenants by simply waiving the last month's rent. This makes it even more clear that while it says tenant throughout the entire statute, the total benefit allowed under the statute is structured by the unit. Therefore, the small nuance there is that while it is, yes, it is provided to each tenant, the payment amount is maxed out at the unit cost of rent. There's no question about this. Proceeding with the ordinance as written will garner hundreds of questions and points of contention. Who is a qualified tenant? Because as defined in this ordinance, it's not simply one that is on the lease agreement either. The city contracted Kaiser Marsan to work and make a recommendation on what would be a reasonable cost for moving a household unit. The KMA study is extensive, and it concludes on page 9 that relocation expense estimates are recommended per unit, and it adds up the average cost of moving a household, noting that moving a larger household is more expensive because of extra furniture, which results in additional labor. There's more on page 5 where they list out utility initiation fees, electric, gas. For the city to turn around and say the landlord should pay these plus a multiplier for each tenant in the household, whether or not they're on the lease, regardless of whether or not they move to the same household, will invite a legal battle due to the lack of nexus for the moving expenses and the amount the tenant will receive. This was already challenged in our courts. It's already a published decision. It was struck down and the city had to pay attorney's fees to the plaintiffs. We need to stick to reasonable relocation expenses and not an ordinance that has no accountability as to how the tenants will spend the money, because that has already been held unconstitutional taking of private property. I know that we don't want to go down that route, but I know this ordinance committee will make the right decision and make it fair for everybody when they're being displaced. And I thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Sally Sanger. Sally Sanger, please go ahead.
Hello, are you able to hear me? Oh, thank you. I'll probably keep it short because the very first speaker really spoke to everything that and much better than I could, because I have no notes or anything planned. I just actually a little bit confused, so I need to just learn a little more about this. I'm born and raised here, and it was just a bit shocking to me to hear that if I have somebody that is going to be moving, or I ask them to move, I have to pay them to move. Anyway, it's just like beyond my realm of knowledge. So I'm here to listen and hear more. So I appreciate you having this hearing. I'm born and raised here. Was mostly a tenant and appreciated being a tenant too. We can't all be owners, and my parents have since passed, and I'm one of those mom and pop. My husband and I have that house and we rent it out. We're in a really bad situation right now because we haven't been getting rent for a while. And that's not part of this ordinance thing, but I think in this time of moving towards equity and fairness, that this is not fair and balanced, and it doesn't seem to look at everybody involved. It seems very biased towards tenants, and maybe that's what it's supposed to be, but it's so one-sided that apparently I must not know the facts behind it, because it just seems ridiculous, quite frankly. So I hope that you will listen to all sides and consider, like the person said before, there are mom and pops, but I think even someone who has a business with this should be considered too, that this just seems a little out of whack, and I appreciate you looking at the whole picture and the repercussions of this. Again, the first caller expressed everything I wanted to say. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Chelsea Lancaster. Chelsea Lancaster, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm calling in support of a strong community stabilization plan as outlined by CAUSE after years of labor trying to protect the most vulnerable folks in our community. Also, the same folks who are keeping our community afloat financially. They are working in our all of our sectors as frontline employees, as necessary workers, as folks who, again, we saw this during the mudslide. Folks have been displaced from Santa Barbara. Black folks were displaced in the 70s and 80s. Black and Latinx and poor folks are being displaced right now. We are about to experience a crisis in this community that mirrors that of others that has already started in places like the Bay Area. I'm asking you again, just like with police civilian oversight, I'm asking you to be courageous. I'm asking you to center those that are closest to the pain. We know that the power imbalance has been way out of whack in terms of landlords and renters. This is not new, but this is a time for you all to stand on the side of good, to stand on the side of justice. Again, as one of the previous speakers named, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare anything calling in, but as one of the previous speakers named, most of the people who are houseless right now were one-time renters in this community. I work with under-resourced families at Santa Barbara City College, people with children, people with elders in their home, again, the most vulnerable people in our community, and they are houseless. They are already being displaced. They've been displaced. So I'm asking you, please, We need to look at this from an equitable perspective. Nobody should be earning a living collecting rental income. I'm sorry that that's the way this system has been designed, but we need to shift that. We need to change that. We need to center renters. That's 60% of our community, at least, that we know of. And again, I'm just asking y'all to please be courageous. Please look at this from an equitable perspective. Please look at this from an anti-racist perspective. Think about the people that are homeowners in our community, most of whom are white and upper class. We really need to be courageous about this. Thank you, everybody on this. Thank you, Kristen and Megan, for bringing this forward. Thank you to the Ordinance Committee for considering this. I yield my time.
Our next speaker is Jay Hartz. Jay Hartz, please go ahead. Jay Hartz, please go ahead. Okay, we'll come back to Jay Hartz. David Garrity. David Garrity, please go ahead.
Microphone, can you hear me? It's Jay Hartz. Okay, great. Thank you. I don't think. So anyway, this time we're in right now is a hard time for everybody, not just renters. Owners are suffering as well, as you've heard from others. We have had a tenant, at least one tenant, whose business failed and they stopped paying for several months. They then left in the middle of the night with the place damaged and a mess. So we've had to deal with that, and we probably are going to have to sell that property as a result. And if so, we certainly want to sell it fairly quickly, because otherwise we're just bleeding money on carrying the mortgage. To require significant relocation benefits, which could be up to $25,000 if there were 3 tenants in the property, would kill us. We wouldn't be able to come up with the money, and we'd be stuck in a position where we couldn't really go forward to sell, and we couldn't do much else. So we think your benefits are out of line. And we think that the proposal, as currently stated, doesn't make any sense. To do it on a per person basis radically jacks up the amount you're going to end up paying, creates perverse disincentives not to rent to more than 2 people, and just isn't in anybody's best interest. There's no reason for the relocation benefits to be based on the size of the unit. That doesn't make any sense at all. If you're going to do it on a per person basis, it should be the same per person. Otherwise, you're paying more money to wealthy people than you are to people who need the assistance, because the wealthy people rent the bigger places. We think it should be done on a per unit basis, as rent is paid and as the state relocation requirement requires. Let's see, to show you an example of how unfair the current proposal is, we have a property that we rent to 3 roommates, 3 young women who are all fairly well off, have good jobs, who are stable, and able to put their money together to rent a bigger, nicer place. Under your proposal, we would pay them $8,400, I think it is, per person. Whereas we have another older couple who lives in a 1-bedroom unit who really need the money, who would receive $2,400 a piece. That doesn't make any sense. And so I think you need to rethink that. Also, the current relocation benefits aren't based on any real data. The consulting company that you had came up with numbers based on what it cost to move a unit, not per person. That suddenly got mysteriously morphed into per person, which makes no sense at all and has no justification. So I think that needs to be reconsidered. Also, I think it's critically important that if there are to be relocation benefits, they only be paid to people who are signatories on the lease. Otherwise, you're going to invite everybody in the planet to show up and say, oh, I live there, I live there. And how can you tell? We've had circumstances where tenants have hidden from us a girlfriend that they moved in or some other person. We didn't know, we couldn't know really, unless you're going to have a private detective standing outside the front door. And so if you invite payment of relocation benefits to people who aren't on the lease, A, you're going to invite fraud, and B, any of those people who are living there but aren't on the lease are in breach of the lease, because the lease is always required that they have to sign on and get vetted and file an application.
Thank you.
It's also, it seems to me, unreasonable.
You're out of time, sir.
Okay. Thanks for your time.
Our next speaker is David Garrity. David Garrity, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Okay. The problem is the Land Subdivision Act and a number of special interest groups that prevent our lower income community from purchasing apartments they live in. We need to sell the existing housing supply, specifically the existing apartments as they are, not as high priced condos and co-ops, to the residents. Unfortunately, until we make real estate affordable for all people of all incomes, we will continue to lock a large group of tenants into a cycle of poverty. Real estate purchase and ownership is the path for many out of poverty. No matter how much money someone makes, if they do not own real estate, they will be poor. Even the owner-occupied government units that have resale price restrictions are not enough. We need to have real estate ownership, not just life estates for some apartments that we cannot make money on when it is sold. We need the city of Santa Barbara to develop TICs, which are tenant in common partnerships and ownership agreements, to circumvent the Land Subdivisions Act. We as individuals need the help of the backing of the government to put this together. We need to sell our existing apartments at affordable rates to the existing community. As I write this, I can see that the government will not be able to implement this. The city has too much bureaucracy and too many special interest groups, and frankly, it's not smart enough to put this together. I've made millions in real estate and I don't need the money, but I would like to help our community. Hire me temporarily at Paul Casey's pay and I'll get thousands of existing apartments sold to residents at affordable prices. I'll create a program for the city to provide to move its poor renter community into an affordable ownership community. I will create a pathway for renters to become owners and for the renters to make money, as well as realtors, existing apartment owners. I can do this with limited controversy. I cannot do this as a volunteer or a consultant. I need the power and authority to avoid the typical government bureaucracy and special interest groups. Your government bureaucracies are not smart enough or creative enough to make this happen. There are too many special interest groups who will get involved and wreck it. Hire me, I will get thousands of renters into owners on the existing units at a similar rate that they pay for rent. Turn renters into owners. Existing landlords can make money when they sell their units. Realtors can make money selling the individual units, and the volume of sales will go up, as will our tax base, and renters will become owners and be able to make money in real estate. I'm not looking for a long-term job. I've made enough money for the rest of my life already. I want to help the city. I need a position which will allow me to boss the city attorney and community development around. No one will be able to get anything done working through the existing establishment. I do not want Paul Casey's job, but I want his authority in order to get things done. Once the program is established with the city, the city will not need me and the entire program can be disbanded. It should be self-sustaining and be able to continue to grow without the government. TICs are the answer. Sincerely, David Garrity, multimillionaire real estate, member of the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association, Pearl Chase Society, Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation, and the Coral Casino. Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next speaker is Tiffany Holler. Tiffany Holler, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to know if anybody here is a landlord on the city council, and also if you all are paying mortgages, property taxes, home insurance, maintenance expenses. This is quite a lot of money each month when you purchase a property in Santa Barbara. I think that the issue here is that, just much like our country, we're on two opposite spectrums of extremes. And the only way that we're going to come together is to think outside the box and try and figure out a way to help the tenants and the homeowners. I think some of the other commenters had mentioned about, when people can't afford groceries, what happens next? Welfare, food stamps, Section 8 housing if they can't afford housing. I'm just wondering, what happens when a tenant can't pay rent? And then what happens when an owner can't pay their mortgage? Both of these people suffer, either through foreclosures or evictions. We need to make this an equal playing field. I have a great idea that I've brought up at a few city council meetings to possibly help the city become the landlord and help them build, offer grants, or offer some loan programs to help them with affordable housing. Much like our TBID tax, which taxes visitors to our city, a per night fee for staying in our city, why couldn't we also tax the tourists that are coming to our town some sort of fee that goes into a pot that basically helps fund any sort of affordable housing for these tenants, whether, like I said, through grants, through loans, through the city building their own housing. I don't think there's anybody out there that would be opposed to having tourists coming to our town have some sort of fee. Maybe it's $1 a night, maybe it's a flat rate that could go into some sort of fund for affordable housing. It's just not fair to have these property owners be the ones that have to suffer here. No property owner is against having rights for and having affordable housing for tenants. It's just the problem is we live in Santa Barbara and the home prices and the property taxes and the insurance and everything else is just too expensive. And it's many of these mom and pop owners that are the best owners that love their tenants and want to provide for them, but they need to pay their bills as well. I hope you'll consider this.
Our next speaker is Esme Evans. Esme Evans, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Esme Evans. I'm a renter here and have been a renter in various places for most of the last 20 years. So I understand the world of rental housing from the side of a tenant. I've had the occasion to see Santa Monica and its rent control system. And in my view, it has not been good for that city. Santa Monica has lost a lot of its rental housing as a result. There's all kinds of people who own homes in other areas and then keep an apartment in Santa Monica because it is a nice little getaway for them. I know people like that, and they have had the house or the apartment for 15 or 20 years. Rent control has created an us versus them culture in that city that did not exist before. It's also reduced the rental properties to the lowest level of quality because the owners don't want to put any money into the properties. And I really don't think that that would be good for Santa Barbara. I also know a little bit about the housing, rental housing from the owner's side. My parents, who are now retired, have spent years fixing up several older properties here. And they did it hoping that it would help them during their retirement to support themselves. Now that they are retired, they're struggling, especially during this pandemic. One of their tenants stopped paying rent completely and then, you know, left the house a mess when they finally left after 4 months. And also the insurance costs and the cost of utilities keep going up. The costs of repairs are high, and the city imposes additional costs such as requiring replacement or repair of sewer laterals, which can cost thousands of dollars. And they see on the news that banks in various states are starting to foreclose on delinquent property owners, and they're really worried and not sure how to go forward. So now, on top of that, they see that you're putting significant burdens on them, causing them to wonder if it's worth offering properties for rent here at all. They're considering whether to sell, which would be a tragedy for them, and there would be fewer rental properties here in Santa Barbara, which is, I think, what you're trying to avoid. And after all the effort and money that they've invested here, they'd really like to be able to not have to take their rental units out of the market. Since anyway, people would probably buy them since they're mostly like single family to live in, so they would not be available. No one is likely to buy rental properties here in light of the direction that this is heading. My suggestion is that you let the recently enacted comprehensive statewide rent control statute take effect and monitor its effects before you act. Otherwise, you're proposing to legislate with no meaningful idea of what negative effects you may be causing. Also, it's far better to have one uniform statewide set of rental regulations than a different set in each city. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Vidal Chiprez. Vidal Chiprez, please go ahead. Vidal Chiprez, please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm having issues over here with my phone. So my name is Vidal Chiprez, and I'm a homeowner, and I also have some apartments for rent in Santa Barbara. I'm Hispanic, and to be honest, I didn't hear about this until recently. And I've been really stressed out about this because I don't have a lot of money in my account. And if this passes, I'm just going to be in the worry that, how am I going to pay for anything if it happens in the future? I spoke to other friends that are Hispanic and own properties and rent, and they never heard anything about it. So it's like the Hispanic community that owns apartments for rent never heard anything about this. So it's like, we left out to find out in a surprise. So to be honest, I'm really stressed out about this because, I provide apartments for people that want to rent in Santa Barbara, but I don't have the luxury of holding thousands of dollars in my account to be able to come up and pay, every person that lives in my apartments if the situation was to be erased. So I just want you guys to take into consideration that there's a lot of us that my taxes are going up every single year, $400 or $500 a year. The water keeps going up, and I pay for all of that. Anytime I have to call a plumber, it's like $300, $400. I mean, it's just, I don't want to put any more stress. I love living in Santa Barbara, and I love being a homeowner, but I don't want to put any more stress on me. And I want to be able to have a beautiful apartment to rent to people that want to live here. So just take into consideration that there's all of us out there that also will be put in a very stressful situation. And thank you for your time.
Sir, can you reach out to me, and I'd like to have a separate conversation with you after the meeting if possible.
Okay, who's this? I'm sorry.
This is Chair Oscar Gutierrez.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Patrick Mcmanus. Patrick Mcmanus, please go ahead.
I appreciate you holding this committee hearing and thank you for taking my comment. I'm a resident and renter in Santa Barbara, and I'm urging the city council members to help implement the just cause evictions protections and community stabilization initiative. In order to prevent these unfair eviction practices, the city must adopt a just cause ordinance so that landlords need a justified reason to evict a tenant. Without this ordinance, landlords, largely real estate LLCs rather than mom and pops, are able to remove tenants for the underlying motivation of increasing rents. The relocation fees are a necessary deterrent for this motivating action. It is imperative that we not allow this to happen, especially during the COVID-19 crisis that has displaced and burdened so many members of our community, disproportionately impacting Black, Indigenous, and people of color in Santa Barbara. In addition to protecting renters in Santa Barbara, we also need to cap the rental increases as much as possible, no more than 2% CPI. 60% of Santa Barbara renters are rent burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. The current status quo is simply unsustainable for working class people. Finally, we need to enforce, Finally, we need enforcement in order to make the protection of renters against unjust evictions a reality. Just cause evictions and rent increase caps need to be enforced by a rent stabilization committee. Such a committee needs to protect tenants, and membership must reflect our diverse community and those who are most impacted by rent increases. These policies reflect the needs of our community in order to make Santa Barbara places welcome and accessible for all people, not just the wealthy few. Thank you so much for holding this committee hearing and for taking my comment.
Thank you. Ms. Clerk, could you do me a favor and read off 3 names that are queued up so that way they could hear their names and get ready to comment? Thank you.
The next 3 speakers that we have, first would be Landon Rank, Don Elkonen, and Carolyn Algier. First, we'll take Landon Rack. Landon Rack, please go ahead.
Councilmember Gutierrez, members of the Ordinance Committee, my name is Landon Rank. I'm a lifelong Santa Barbaran and renter here on the west side of Santa Barbara. I wanted to call in support of the Just Cause Ordinance. I work with low-income members of the community. I know the burden of rent in this community, and with the looming evictions that we're facing due to COVID-19, we need to implement really as many protections as we can in this moment, just to prevent a pretty drastic change of the face of the community of Santa Barbara, which is what is looming at this point. I want to echo what's been said earlier by some of the speakers. It is unfortunate that our system is set up such that housing is treated as a business. As an individual citizen, I believe it's a human right. And I think the more that we can implement ordinances that reflect this compassion and empathy for our neighbors, it reflects well on us as a community and city. Thank you for your time.
Okay, next speakers, we're going to take Don Elkonen, then it'll be Carolyn Algier, and then Kim Crane. Don Elkonen, please go ahead. Donna,
Okay, there
Donna, there you go.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
This is Don Elkonen. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am a rental property owner and have been property manager. I'm now retired for 40 years in Santa Barbara. I have no issue with tenants being offered displacement funds, providing that eviction amounts that are reasonable. I don't believe what's being proposed is at all reasonable. And the speaker is speaking in favor of displacement. I don't know if they even know exactly that, but that's not my point right now. Most instances where a landlord would provide a no-fault eviction would involve either a desire to renovate the unit or to move in a family member. They should expect to have reasonable payment for displacement, but if the displacement costs are too high, they'll simply let the unit go without improvements in lieu of renovations or have their rights trampled, in fact, if they wish to utilize the rental for family members. The provisions requiring funds to cover the new deposit, currently, it's either give the funds within the first 15 days or cash for keys, with the two options provided. Neither of them are win-win. In the first case, as mentioned in your own documents, loaner runs the risk of the tenants using the money for something else, and then they have only the option to litigate when there's empty pockets. I suggest a letter from the new landlord and the money then sent directly to the landlord, and then we have to deal with whatever the total amount is agreed to. Has to be, you have to have the existing security deposit deducted from it, because they also get that when they leave. The special needs, when you add on for special needs, you're going to cause owners and managers to choose someone else, because you all know how many applicants we get when we rent property. And the same thing with fewer individuals versus more. And then owners will look and see, it says anybody not on the lease, they're going to use it's a just cause eviction to get rid of the tenants. Win-win displacement fee structure, if it's not found, will result in not helping anyone, renters or owners. And finally, off the issue, the intent to provide affordable housing is totally on the wrong track, and I've written on that separately and well again. But many renters aren't even aware that the state 1482 is in place. Good luck.
Our next speakers are Carolyn Algier, Kim Crane, and then Lloyd Beardsmar. Carolyn Algier, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, or I guess it's morning there. I'm in Florida. My husband and I come from nothing. Both went to college on scholarships, had a career, loved Santa Barbara. We both worked out at Santa Barbara Research Center. And then the company moved us around. It's kind of like being in the high-tech army. You go where they tell you to go. And we had a little house on the Riviera that we didn't want to leave. We hoped always that someday we could come back. So we are erstwhile landlords, even though the plan is to come back next year. We have had many tenants, and in fact, there's a little guest apartment and a house. It's very small, but for the last 3 years, we haven't raised the rent at all. I had several management companies. I ended up doing it myself, so I didn't have to, because management companies are expensive. So I just worked it out with my tenants. So if something was wrong with American Home Shield, we got things fixed. It's been a team effort, and I care deeply about my tenants. I think I also have been a renter for years and years, and I'm a chef. So I work in the kitchen with lots of Hispanic people, and I'm very sensitized to their issues. So I'm actually on the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association and the Cause website, because I understand is what I'm trying to say. I'm asking our wise city council people, please, to do a best practices search. Do your research. Let's come up with a creative solution here, because I think mom and pop people, I hear people all day long saying, I'm not going to rent anymore. This is crazy, which is not what we need. We need more rentals, and we need them to be fairly available, right? So maybe there could be a way that we make it more favorable for mom and pops. There's, more exemption for people who maybe have an apartment or they're doing Airbnb to rent those places. I know that becomes a problem with neighbors, but and maybe you've already done all of this, but I just hope that this is a Solomon with a baby kind of a situation. I'm just very fearful that this can go the wrong way, and we will end up with a worse problem. So, I think it's very unfair that if lots of people are moved into my place when I'm going to take it back. This is my house. We're going to live there. And we've been planning this. We're retiring. This is our, the pinnacle of our work life. We get to come home to Santa Barbara, that I have to pay it could be $25,000. And we're, on a fixed income now. So anyway, I just really appreciate your wisdom with this, and I know you'll make the right decision. Thank you.
Our next speakers are Kim Cray, Lloyd Beardsmar, and Mark Melton. Kim Crane, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, council members. My husband and I have owned our small duplex for 20 years now, and we saved long and hard to do it. We manage the properties ourselves because it's exorbitant to have property management do it for us. And this will also be our retirement. So I just want to let you know that we landlords who provide this rental service and those that purchase that rental service do so through legal rental lease contracts that are fair to both parties. Please consider all constituents, which is your sworn duty, when you are instituting these myriad changes and ordinances that have been coming at us nonstop. The landlords in this town are good people who provide a fair and just rental service to our many renters here. We're upstanding and caring landlords. How we care for our tenants equates to our income stability. And so we operate at the highest level of tenant care. Most of our tenants are long-term. We have great relationships. We take care of each other. The unfortunate COVID pandemic is not the time to further burden landlords with additional costs and financial hardship. Many are already feeling this and are having difficulties in their financial management of their units. The in-place ordinance that pays relocation costs is just one more burden on landlords. And if it must be so, then it should be per unit and definitely not per tenant. Thank you for your time.
Our next speakers are Lloyd Beardsmar, Mark Melton, and Trish Fancher. Lloyd Beardsmar, please go ahead. Okay, we'll come back to Lloyd Beardsmar. Mark Melton. Mark Melton, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Mark Melton. I also am opposed to this ordinance. My understanding is that already existing in California, 1482 is a just cause eviction provision, and there's already a provision for providing tenants with relocation assistance. And it's only been in place for 8 months, or not even 8 months yet. I'm not sure what the compelling reason is for rushing into adding, yet more expenses to landlords. I haven't seen any data or any report that shows that this is justified at this time. My background is I too came from nothing. I put myself through Cal State Fullerton. I moved to Santa Barbara with my wife over 30 years ago. We started a house cleaning business and then a janitorial business. And in 2012, I sold my janitorial business and started the process of trying to retire. And at that point, I bought some apartments on Mitchell-Terrena, and I bought an adjacent unit or adjacent property that was derelict on Castillo. Put the two together, borrowed a ton of money, and developed 12 brand new rental units with the intent of providing those as an income for myself and my wife in our retirement, because we don't have government pensions. We don't have pensions of any kind. And one of the earlier speakers said people shouldn't make a living from rental housing. Well, if people can't make money from rental housing, then you won't have private investment in rental housing. And when we redeveloped our property on Mitchell-Terrena, it was in pretty bad condition. The existing units were seriously neglected. And, I think somebody would accuse me of being another Dario Pini had I not fixed them up. But we did pay relocation because the city actually has on the books before the state thing an ordinance for paying relocation assistance when you're doing remodeling. And we paid 2 tenants who had to move because we were fixing up the units. My point is that I think there's more than enough protections in place. I don't think that it's fair that the landlords are consistently being asked to do more. And I feel like this is just part of a larger picture of taking away private property rights and people's ability so that only there will be government housing in Santa Barbara in the future. If that's what everybody wants, that's fine, but people will stop investing in additional units or improving units. My time is up. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker, Lloyd Beardsmar, we'll check back with him. Trish Fancher, and then we have Terry Gray. Lloyd Beardsmar, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I think this is a terrible time to be doing any kind of change to any or adding any ordinances. My computer just crashed while I was waiting to be called. And so unless your technology is really up to date, which I thought I was, and I was prepared to comment, technology is not helping this process to allow everyone who wants to comment on this ordinance or take part in our government right now to be able to do so. I've heard Ariel Kalan, when he was trying to speak last week, there were audio issues. There have been issues with a lot of other things, technology-wise. It's not equal access to everybody. I would ask you, how many tenants are able to call in at 10 o'clock during the day to express their views on it? Likewise, landlords as well. So this isn't equal access. in addition to doing that, it's evidenced by the Hispanic landlord that was unaware that this ordinance was even being considered. So this process is not transparent and accessed equally by all that would be effective. Number three, many renters don't even know about AB 1482 that Just Cause already exists to protect them. Number four, I'd like to ask how many evictions have occurred since 1482 has been enacted? Why not give it a chance to work and evaluate it before enacting something that would be more stringent? And like I said, doing this right now with limited access for the public to weigh into this process is not, it's just not right. It should not be done. It's being done basically with very few people's input. And again, this negatively will affect mom and pop landlords. No one is going to evict a good tenant, but if for some reason we need to move back into one of our units, it's going to cost us money to do so. And that's not right. And as far as the rent stabilization and the transparency of that process and wanting to call attention to that discussion, Kristen, you and Harmon have gone out of your way to work with one side of the issue, not both. You've not encouraged landlords to reach out on social media, etc. It's not transparent. To me, it's a breach of public trust. I will never be able to trust you or Megan Harmon again. And I wonder how many other council members have done this.
Thank you.
Our next speakers are Trish Fancher, Terry Gray, and then Yui Axelson. Trish Fancher, please go ahead. Trish Fancher, please go ahead. Okay, we'll come back to Trish Fancher.
No, sorry.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I thought I hit the button. So I'm Trish Fancher. I've lived here for 6 years and I've rented here for 6 years. I want to thank the community organizers at Cause. They've been fighting for these rental policies for many years. I've seen that fight and I really appreciate the work they've done for many years. I also want to thank my particular representative, Megan Hartman, for helping to lead this charge and hopefully make these policies a reality. She represents me and I really appreciate her. I support the community stabilization plan. Santa Barbara needs serious protections for renters, and it affects everyone because housing is a human right. I think many of the people calling in opposition to this are actually misrepresenting some of the policy changes, especially regarding relocation funding. This relocation funding is specific to no-fault evictions. And the last woman said that people don't evict good tenants. People evict good tenants all the time. I had a neighbor who was evicted because the homeowner wanted to put his home for sale. I have another friend who was evicted because the homeowner wanted to have their mother-in-law move in. And they were given 30 days notice. The family who moved because their they wanted to put the home on up for sale had a 6-month-old child and had 30 days to move. It was impossible. So I want to also note that these homeowners complain that they don't have much money in the bank, but at the same time, they have several homes. Those homes are investments and they give them security, backup, and income. Renters like myself don't have money to save because all of my money goes to rent. Over 30% of my income goes to rent. Each year, my rent goes up, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to stay in Santa Barbara because the rent increases each year. A previous commenter also said that he didn't see the data that justified this. Well, this is a racial justice issue, and the data suggests from 2008 census data that in 6 years, 24% of the Latinx population was pushed out of Santa Barbara. That is incredibly high, and it actually equated to about one family every single day being pushed out. And now our Latinx community is also being disproportionately affected by COVID. We don't see how COVID and rental rights aren't connected. You're not thinking hard enough. So if we continue like this, the only people who can afford to call Santa Barbara home will be white, rich retirees and also mostly vacant second homes. I cede my time.
Our next speaker is Terry Gray, then Yui Axelson, then Michael Aguirre. Carrie Gray, please go ahead. There you go.
Oh my gosh.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, I first of all want to tell you that this stabilization will not lead to stabilization that you want, because I can tell you that what happened in Santa Monica is already happening here. People will quit renting houses or apartments or units in their houses and use them for their own family members, or they will sell them to people who will live in them. We have already sold one house here in Santa Barbara, and we have one more that we might sell. And of course, the people moved in. People are coming from all over. If you look at the statistics of the real estate sales for the last few weeks, you'll see there's an amazing jump in how many people want to live here to get away from the city, which is so tight, dangerous, hot, et cetera, et cetera. Now, rents are just part of the community, part of the, I'm sorry, my words aren't coming out right. The cost of rental housing is part of the whole economy. It derives from scarcity and it derives from demand. You can't stop the demand, but you can stop the scarcity. So I would really encourage you to please let this law that has already been put on the books work and see how it works, see what happens. It seems so very unfair that after all the years of working hard, my father was an immigrant. I came from nothing. I went to school when it didn't cost to go to college, or I never could have gone. I worked as a school teacher and saved my money so that we could buy a house. And then we saved and saved and saved again until we could buy another house. So I'm not one of those rich people that have so many places to live and have a lot of money. And I try to keep my tenants happy that are there. And we have had them for many years, and we never raised rents until they started forcing us to raise rents. The other thing I really think I should say is the city should have a part in the financial difficulty. The city should provide bridge loans for the relocation money and let the landlords who can't afford it pay them back over time. People haven't been informed about what's going on. It seems like you're doing it under a cloak of darkness, especially now when we can't even come to talk to you individually in your offices. You should wait and let the other thing work, and wait till we can come in and talk to you all and talk to you. Maybe you'll understand a little better. We shouldn't have to pay to move into our own homes or have our children do it. But I do appreciate your listening to me, and thank you very much.
Our next speakers are Yui Axelson, Michael Aguirre, Estela Montano. Yui Axelson, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my computer went down, so I had to do this on the phone. I'm over 70, so I'm not technically that savvy. I just want to say, Oscar, you said to meet this gentleman that said that he wasn't informed. I'm Swedish. I'm not informed either. It seems like everything that's happened is sort of in a haze for everybody, and that the meeting was 10 o'clock this morning. I just found out because I couldn't sleep last night, and Stacy Kaplan sent out something. So I agree, we all need to be fair. I am a property owner, but right now the crisis is not all due to landlords. So therefore, I think this needs to be put on hold until we can separate where the problem lies. I mean, the tenants have a rental mediation task force, they have legal aid, they have just cause, or the committee cause, and maybe, one more committee to not cause this divide that this is causing between tenants and landlords. I disagree. There are mostly small mom and pop owners in Santa Barbara, which I am. I almost had to sell last year because of one tenant cost me $28,000 because of legal aid who did not find out anything about anything. I just kept getting accused. And it turned out to be a disaster for me. And I'm over 70, still working. I have never seen anybody in Santa Barbara been thrown out that is a really good tenant unless a person wants to move in there themselves, which a lot of people, they buy for the future. So I think the just cause is something that I just don't understand. And I think we need to really look at this before we make a mistake and divide the city like the country is being divided right now. Really look at this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speakers are Michael Alguire, Estela Montano, and Stacy Kaplan. Michael Alguire, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to the council too for considering this. I want to say the unintended consequences issue is a very big one to me. The Santa Monica example is an example we should all take heart from. Realizing the state has made, with the legislation, they have made a statement on fairness and trying to deal with the issues associated with the COVID pandemic and the displacement of people. I'm certainly sympathetic to that and I feel good. I actually was evicted once. I was renting in Santa Barbara and I got a 30-day notice on June 1st that I had to be out by the end of the month. It's several years ago now. It was disheartening and it was very difficult to find another place to live at that point, which I ended up doing. But I also want to note that this COVID pandemic has caused people in New York, in LA, in the large metropolitan areas, they're looking to get out of those places. And I think one of the unintended consequences is going to be that people who do have houses that they are renting but not living in right now, they typically here have been called mom and pop people, but I think what they were investments that these people made for their retirement years. They're going to look very seriously at it and say, it's time for me to sell. I'm not going to rent anymore. And who's going to buy that? Well, there are thousands of people looking from New York City, from Los Angeles, from Houston, from outside of these big cities. They want to move to these places. Santa Barbara is wonderful. The electronic world we live in, I know there's been complaints here about the connectivity, but we are all talking to each other. I'm seeing the council members on my screen. This means I am very, very able to move to Santa Barbara and buy this house that was primarily rental, but now it will be a home that someone lives in. So my concern is that this is creating uncertainty, and the uncertainty is going to cause people to say, I can't afford uncertainty, I'm going to sell, which means there'll be fewer rental properties. And as one of the prior speakers says, the prices are typically set by demand and supply. Certainly you can put in conditions around that, but now it creates more bureaucracy, which creates more cost, which only exacerbates the problem, meaning there are fewer places to rent. So I understand the fairness issue. I think this is premature. I think we should let the state regulations run for a while and then take action to do the right thing for all the people of Santa Barbara and the surrounding areas. Thank you for your time.
Our next speakers are Estela Montano, Stacy Kaplan, and JB Alagane. Estela Montano, please go ahead. Estela Montano, please go ahead.
Buenos días, gracias por tomar mi llamada y lo que quiero decir es de que realmente necesitamos, sé que se escucha mal, es un control de renta. Nadie va a perder, tanto ni los dueños ni como los renteros, porque el dinero está ahí, es mes con mes. No es cierto que pagan tanto dinero porque no lo pagan mes con mes, que se descompone esto, que se descompone el otro, no es verdad. Y ese dinero queda ahí precisamente para que puedan pagar su mortgage o lo que tengan que pagar. son 12 meses al año, es demasiado dinero. Entonces, lo que nosotros necesitamos es un control de renta. Sé que se escucha mal, pero es la realidad. Entonces, seamos realistas. Nadie va a perder. Todos ganamos. Gente viene a vivir. Lo que dicen de Santa Mónica, gente está viviendo allá, está yendo a vivir allá. Nada se pierde, por lo contrario, todos ganamos. Entonces, les pido de la manera más atenta a los del concilio que realmente pongan esto y lo necesitamos ya. Y realmente es un dinero que nosotros, que no ganamos mucho dinero, que trabajamos día con día, noche, mañana, tarde, tenemos hijos y tenemos que pagar renta. No lo podemos ganar en un mes. Entonces, de la manera más atenta, les puedo pedir que se solucione esto y así vamos a terminar con tantas dimes y que no diremos. De la manera más atenta, otra vez les pido que se realice esto lo más pronto posible. Muchas gracias por su atención y les agradezco de antemano.
Gracias. For those that don't speak Spanish, she was for the just cause eviction ordinance to pass because of how hard it is to afford to live here and what it's like to suffer an unjust eviction.
Okay, our next speakers are JB Allegheny, I'm sorry, it's going to be Stacy Kaplan first. Kaplan, JB Allegheny, then Cynthia Shadian. Stacy Kaplan, please go ahead.
Chair Gutierrez and council members, I'm serving as the president of the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, and I'm speaking on behalf of our 1,300 members and our clients who are both housing providers and tenants. We have community members suffering from the fallout of the pandemic, loss of employment, and rental income. Therefore, we request you postpone this ordinance entirely until the effects of the pandemic and AB 1482 can be studied. Regarding the proposed just cause and relocation ordinance, we request clear language to amend relocation to apply per unit, not per tenant, to be congruent with the Kaiser Marston Nexus study and all prior tenant landlord task force negotiations and agreements, which were based upon per unit relocation. Changing this part of the ordinance after years of reliance upon this premise is unfair and unwarranted. Housing providers don't base rent upon how many tenants live in a unit. Whether there's one tenant or four, the housing provider still collects the same amount of rent. The reverse of this equation should be true. Tenants should not make additional money from moving. Furthermore, this proposed ordinance will actually hurt those it's intended to help. Housing providers will limit the number of occupants in a unit if implemented as it currently reads, or worse, sell, thereby further reducing available rental housing stock. Please amend the relocation to apply per unit. Regarding the relocation assistance payment required to be paid to the qualified tenant or special needs tenant within 15 calendar days after service of the notice, we request you amend relocation to half and half. 50% at the time of notice and 50% at the time the unit is vacated and keys are handed over, a cash for keys approach, or delay payment until the unit surrendered. If a tenant receives their relocation assistance within the 15 calendar days, they could decide to remain, and the housing provider would have no remedy except to proceed with an expensive litigation battle. We request either cash for keys or the 50-50 approach to be adopted instead of the current language. Regarding definitions, we request the definition of a tenant should be defined as a person specifically listed on a lease, and we request you remove people with children and those aged over 62 from the category of, quote, special needs. Nowhere in California or federal law does special needs include a parent or a legal guardian residing with their child in the rental unit. If people with children need to be within a different classification from the general population, it should be under a separate heading, such as special considerations. And we suggest a definition of child being under the age of 18, and that relocation assistance apply only during the commencement of the academic school year. Please keep a sunset date so the program can be studied and so that the ordinance is not in perpetuity and arbitrary. but is based on a careful review and study of the outcome, including unintended consequences. Thank you.
Our next speakers are JB Allegiani, Cynthia Shadian, and Steve Mountain. JB Allegiani, please go ahead.
Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me?
can. Yes.
Very good. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I oppose the changes. I come from San Francisco, lived there for many years, through almost 3 decades, and I saw as the rent control measures got harsher and harsher, the variety of tenants began to disappear. These kinds of limits push landlords to have to rent to high-income individuals where the risk is considered less. I can also tell you that it does reduce the amount of available housing. I've seen it with my own eyes. Every time they passed more and more laws, fewer and fewer people rented. I owned a 4-unit building and I just gave up. After a point, I left. The building went TIC, no renters at all. There were 9 people living there when I first moved in. There's still 9 people, but they're all owners now. I'm seeing the same thing happen here in Santa Barbara. It's a little bit like the eye of the needle. You know, it's just going to start, and there's always going to be an emergency and always a need for more and more and more and more. And I'm sorry, this is not going to solve the problem. The problem is a shortage of housing, not the landlords. And so if you allow housing to be built, then things will change eventually. And this will not do that. This will cause more people to sell and it'll make housing much more expensive. You don't get something for nothing is basically the answer. All these things cost something, and usually it comes in the form of much higher rents or decreased availability, and or both. Previous speakers have said very well all of my concerns and things that I've witnessed, so I'm not going to repeat them. I am going to say that I find the whole process that this has all been snuck in under the rug reprehensible. It's no different than the Republicans that I see, you know, with Mitch McConnell and stuff, where they're just, you know, ramming things through. I'm sorry, this needs public comment and this needs to be aired out properly. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is going to be Cynthia Shadian, Steve Mountain, then Sherry Higgins. Cynthia Shadian, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Like the prior speaker, I oppose the changes, and this is the wrong time to be addressing these changes. I think giving a little bit of my personal experience may help understand these issues and what landlords must deal with. I have been a landlord. I purchased my first property in my early 20s with lots of blood, sweat, and tears. I've been a landlord in the Los Angeles area for 35 years, but I came to Santa Barbara for work, and I've been a renter here for 4.5 years. So I have a unique perspective being both a renter in Santa Barbara and a landlord in Los Angeles, and all of the properties are rent controlled. As a self-employed person, most of my life, this is my retirement income and my family's income most of their lives. All the units that I have purchased in the past were all dilapidated, rundown units that really no one could live in. I fixed them up, I put them back on the market for fair rental amounts, and people enjoy living there. And I created units by doing this type of thing. We have mortgages on all those properties. So if our tenants don't pay rent, then we can't pay our payments, and those rental properties will come off the market. Owning a rental unit is really no different than any other business. And you wouldn't tell a dry cleaner that they can only charge 50 cents to dry clean a shirt, or a restaurant owner that you can only charge $2 for that meal. It's putting all the onus on the landlords. I agree with the prior speaker, this will have unintended consequences. We've seen this in Los Angeles, and let's not repeat this in Santa Barbara. I love my new home and I hope to stay here and buy myself one day, but it is very hard to be a tenant and a buyer here. This will hurt tenants. because what we've seen in Los Angeles is there's more discrimination, not less, because you do tend to see those landlords who won't choose that family. They'll simply choose somebody who can pay more and maybe have fewer people in the unit. So sometimes seniors, families are discriminated against, and because the landlords have to be very careful. There are more institutional owners now in Los Angeles after the subprime meltdown. Many institutions bought up housing and rented them out. And there will, if this passes in Santa Barbara, there will be fewer mom and pops. You know, there were many times during our careers that the tenants got a new roof, but we didn't. Our house always came last. The tenants always came first, and an ability to give those tenants clean, wonderful units, desirable, safe units. And this is not the right time. Again, the unintended consequences will be devastating for the tenants.
You're out of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speakers are Steve Mountain, Sherry Higgins, then Ethan Zakai. Steve Mountain, please go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, council members and staff. My name is Steve Mountain. I live here in Santa Barbara and have been self-employed for 41 years, working 50 to 60 hours per week. During that time, I have managed to acquire 2 modest rentals. I will rely heavily on the income from these for my retirement. My guiding principles as a landlord are that I wouldn't own anything that I wouldn't live in, and I treat my tenants like I would want to be treated. I'd like to read you 2 actual quotes I recently received from 2 of my tenants. The first is from Susan, the mother of one of a group of young women whose rent I have voluntarily reduced during this time of COVID. Steve, thank you for being the outstanding person that you are. The other is a text from Miranda, a tenant for whom I was able to show up and fix a plumbing issue within 2 hours of her call. Thank you for being the best landlord ever. We appreciate it so much. I have been approached by out-of-town companies wanting to buy both of these properties. It's very likely that the people approaching me are the kind of people for whom the restrictions you propose are necessary. But if the restrictions and limitations placed on us landlords continue to be increasingly onerous, as you seem intent on, I will very likely take these offers and use a 1031 exchange to buy property someplace more business friendly. I urge you to step back, take a look at the bigger picture here, and actually listen to the people that live, work, pay taxes, and vote in this beautiful city, not the outside special interest pressing you to act on their personal and political agendas. You can still do the right thing. I would like to donate my remaining time to the attorneys and staff of the SBRPA should they so need it. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Sherry Higgins, then Ethan Zakai, then Stanley Chisnov. Sherry Higgins, please go ahead. Sherry Higgins, please go ahead. Okay, we'll come back to Sherry Higgins. We're going to go to Ethan Zakai. Ethan Zakai, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to speak. I've lived and rented in Santa Barbara for 11 years now. As the son of a small-scale landlord in LA, I'm familiar with this mindset of treating investment property as a reliable source of income. I'm here to criticize this mindset. Housing is a human right. Anybody who describes being evicted as disheartening is privileged enough to not understand the threat of being unhoused. These people have friends, parents, or savings accounts or other safety nets in their lives. Nearly 70% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. I ask everyone on this call, when was the last time you were able to spend less than $1,000 on a housing change? let alone one that you only got a month notice for. Look, here's an example. I bought stock in General Electric a few years ago as an investment. I expected dividends from that investment. It seemed reliable given GE's history. It did well for a little while, and then the market turned around, GE fell on hard times, and they stopped paying dividends on my investment. That was the risk I took when I bought the investment. At least when my investment failed, I didn't kick somebody out of their home, unlike some of the cruel, evil investors on this meeting. When you buy an investment property, you are not entitled to dividends any more than when you buy stock in a company or barrels of oil to resell or Beanie Babies for that matter. Landlords invested in a rental unit. They are not entitled to a payout on that investment. I yield my time. Thank you.
We're going to check back with Sherry Higgins. Sherry Higgins, please go ahead. Sherry Higgins. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Stanley Tzankov, then Betty Jeppesen, then James Carbone. Stanley Tzankov, please go ahead.
Good morning, Council Members Sneddon and Jordan, Chair Gutierrez, and community members on this call. Thank you so much for your time and for hearing us today. I'm calling in as a staff member at the Fund for Santa Barbara, a board member of CAUSE, and a member of the Santa Barbara Tenants Council. Most of all, though, I'm calling in as a longtime renter in Santa Barbara who's concerned about and deeply saddened by the increasingly severe mass displacement of our renter community. I'm calling in today to lend my strong support for the proposed recommendations on relocation assistance for no-cause evictions as put forward by CAUSE and supported by so many of my fellow public commenters who are able to join the call today. We've been discussing just cause for over 4 years now. This is not a new issue, as some of the opponents to this ordinance are suggesting. And the demands we're hearing from year after year come authentically from the community. They're not some mythical outside special interests, as the past speaker stated. There are neighbors, friends, family, coworkers. And by definition, this ordinance is creating certainty and predictability that property owners can plan for, as well as tenants. So I think it's good that we're addressing this issue now. Our city's just cause ordinance should include adequate relocation assistance that covers common moving expenses. As in other cities with more sensible tenant protections, this typically amounts to 4 times the median monthly rent and an amount 5 times that for people with access and functional needs. As a benchmark, the city's own study in July this year, median monthly rent for an apartment is $1,600 for a studio, $1,925 for a 1-bed, and so on and so forth. I'm also looking forward to and fully supportive of the related community stabilization initiative discussion, since it relates so closely to the conversation here and is vital for so many of our neighbors, and really helps shape who the city allows to continue living here. My understanding is that city staff is currently forwarding about 100 emails or so that echo support for both. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. As you know, families and friends are being uprooted and pushed out of our home by unfair evictions and rampant rent increases. And it bears highlighting that this is an issue that disproportionately affects working families and people of color. And all of that was before the current global pandemic and looming economic depression, which we're all facing together. It's obvious that we cannot wait to protect renters, and that COVID-19 has only unearthed and deepened our housing crisis. So now is really the time that we must do everything that we can on this serious issue. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay, we're going to check back with Sherry Higgins. Sherry Higgins, please go ahead. Ms. Higgins, please go ahead. Okay, our next speaker is Betty Jeppesen, then James Carbone, then Juliet C. Betty Jeppesen, please go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Betty Jeppesen, the local attorney and current president of the Santa Barbara Rental Property Association. I thank the Ordinance Committee and City Attorney Ariel Colon for the opportunity to give input. With respect to the issue of relocation costs payable per unit or per tenant, I propose that it is per unit for the following reasons. The statewide Tenant Protection Act is now located in 3 sections of the Civil Code. Section 1946.2 provides in subsection B that one way of satisfying the statewide rule is to waive the last month's rent for the unit. The amount of the statewide relocation is found in subsection 3A, which is 1 month's rent for the unit. The Kaiser Marston study returned findings per unit and not per tenant. It has been suggested that it would be very difficult to pay per unit rather than per tenant. My response is that it is just the same as a security deposit refund, which is given per unit rather than per tenant. A rental contract is a joint and several obligation, which means that the duty to pay rent is shared and any relocation assistance is shared as well. The Santa Barbara Condominium Conversion Act requires a lump sum payment per unit. Not all landlords are rich. I have clients who have 1 unit from which the income pays for a convalescent homestay for the other of the spouses. Any ordinance should not be permanent. Forever is too long. The statewide plan already in place should be studied for its effectiveness before stringent measures are taken. And any restriction on rent increases should be tied to CPI and not be any arbitrary percentage. Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is James Carbone, then Juliet C., then Michael Carbone. James Carbone, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. So my wife and I are 2 of those mom and pop people who derive the majority of their income from a couple rental units that we own. AB 1482 offers protections for no-fault just cause evictions and rent control. The bill was vetted by many people with diverse backgrounds at the state level, and after much debate was approved by the governor. It went into effect in October of 2019. Last week, the city council member asked a question of the staff if any studies had been done to determine the effects. The answer from the city attorney was no. In response to Q&A, why the ordinance was more protective, the only answer was because we can. It is irresponsible to enact additional ordinances addressing the same problem before the effects of AB 1482 have been studied and are known. The proposed ordinance did not follow the guidelines from the rental relocation study, or relocation assistance study, commissioned by the city specifically for this purpose. It arbitrarily escalated the cost from per unit to per tenant with no rational justification or data to back it up. It has been mentioned by many. Over half of the direct financial impact of this relocation study is based on the security deposit for a new rental unit. This is not a cost. Unless the tenant fails to pay rent or damages a unit, they receive their full security deposit back within 3 weeks after they vacate. It's not a cost. It's interesting to note, too, that without this security deposit, it brings the amount of relocation assistance basically in line with the amount in AB 1482. We're in the middle of a pandemic of epic proportions, and there are protections in place at the state level that prevent evictions at least till the end of September and will likely be extended through the end of this year and potentially longer. Landlords are required to let tenants live in their property and not pay rent. This has put an incredible financial burden on landlords who in many cases will never recover the back rent and must pay all the expenses. Recently, we had a family of 5 who moved out of one of our 2-bedroom units downtown after several years of tenancy. They moved for personal reasons outside of the city, but within the South Coast. I just contacted them and they advised that they moved themselves, had no expenses other than some gasoline and utility setup fees, so clearly under $200. That is true with most of our tenants. While this termination was voluntary, it demonstrates how completely out of line the proposed ordinance is and how grossly punitive it is for landlords. I would question the legality of these punitive measures, mostly at the expense of senior citizens like my wife and I. The The proposed ordinance would force us to pay $27,340 for this move when the actual cost was $200. No additional time should be spent on local ordinance over just cause eviction or rent control until the effects of AB 1482 are known and it can be clearly demonstrated that there is a need. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Juliet C., then Michael Carbone, then Michelle Roberson. Juliet C., please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to make this pretty short because basically everyone who has spoken in opposition of this proposed ordinance has said everything and then some. I represent my family here in Santa Barbara. We've been here probably, well, almost 100 years now. My father's grandfather came over from Italy, settled in the 30s, and from then on, we still live here, our entire family. In a nutshell, I really, really resent statements such as white, rich retirees and no one should be earning a living using rental income. May I correct you respectfully that my father, almost 80 years old, still lives on the property he was raised in, he was born in. He receives a very modest monthly income for his living expenses. We are in no way, shape, or form rich, wealthy. I rent myself. I don't even own property here in town. I help him manage it. I drive a 14-wheel car. I could go on and on. My point being is that please, when considering, be fair to both sides. Don't do underhanded dealings. Treat everyone equally. I hear a lot of talk about how all landlords are big, bad conglomerates, the LLCs, even the mom and pops. I tell you what, he has a very small handful of rental units here in town. They sustain him. They keep him kicking every day. He gets out, he gets active, he is enjoying his life that way. And so please, don't throw all the bad, a few bad apples in the barrel, so to speak, of these others that, yeah, they might be doing harm, but you know what? Think about what you're doing, because I plead with you, like many, many other speakers before me have replied, it will do more harm. You will take away housing. People will become so disenchanted with this process. It is going to be a mess for everyone. And again, I emphasize respectfully, please hear all sides. Please no more secrecy. Please be upfront, open, and honest communication. We deserve the respect, and in turn, we give it to everyone else. And last but not least, I have never had a tenant leave because they do not like us, they do not like the properties, or the rents are too high. In fact, tenants have left only because they're purchasing new property, if you can believe it or not. So our rents aren't even market rate. So anyway, again, thank you so much for listening. Please give this careful thought, and I appreciate all of what you're doing. Thank you for letting me speak.
We're going to check back with Sherry Higgins. Sherry Higgins, please go ahead. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Ms. Higgins. Okay, we're going to go on to Michelle Carbone. Michelle Carbone, please go ahead.
Good morning. I am the mom and pop half of a mom and pop business that provides 2-bedroom duplexes in the city for rental. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. As you know, the 2019-2020 grand jury report stated that the city's policies for affordable housing have faltered. They identified 9 findings and recommendations regarding the housing crisis in the city of Santa Barbara. None of these findings recommend that just cause evictions and rental relocation assistance and eventual rent control beyond AB 1482 are necessary solutions for our city. The real issue that the city of Santa Barbara faces is the need for more affordable housing and the failure to comply with state requirements to obtain it. It's absolutely impossible to fix this problem by simply implementing baseless requirements that force good landlords to pay tens of thousands of dollars to tenants for no reason. Many people don't seem to understand that rental property is a for-profit business with low margins. You cannot sustain a business if you fix and reduce the prices and don't reduce the costs. It costs money to provide housing. The cost of property taxes, insurance, cost of construction and maintenance, utilities, et cetera, are all significantly higher in our community than in other parts of California. These costs must be factored into the rent in order for a business or rental housing to be sustainable. The only real way to reduce costs is to reduce costs, use public lands, build smaller units at lower cost, and provide government subsidies and incentives. Raise the minimum wage. This is elementary economics. This is exactly what the state directed Santa Barbara to do and what the grand jury has documented the city did not do. Santa Barbara needs to follow the state guidance. You cannot solve the affordable housing crisis by pandering to special interests while driving small local property owners out of business. Establishing exorbitant and unjustified penalties for just cause, no fault eviction relocation on landlords, while considering rent control, licensing, inspections, and establishing commissions are not the solution. I strongly oppose the relocation ordinance as written. It will result in a proposed relocation payment of 5 times the amount recommended in the study and 10 times the amount established in AB 1492. In many cases, it could be 100 times the actual cost incurred by tenants.
I can't hear what you're saying right now.
Okay, I will just submit my letter. Thank you for your time.
I will just submit my letter. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Next speaker is Michelle Roberson, then Wendy Santamaria, and then Erin Becerra.
Ms. Clerk, is that feedback on our end? They have their mic on?
It sounds like it. This is Michelle. I've already spoken, so I'm going to hang off. But
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Wendy Santamaria. Wendy Santamaria, please go ahead. Wendy Santamaria, please go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Wendy Santamaria. I'm a community organizer with the Central Coast Alliance United for Sustainable Economy, or CAUSE. I'm also a tenant and a constituent in Santa Barbara. I'm here in full support of the just cause eviction protections, and I'm here on behalf of CAUSE to address the discussion of relocation assistance. We know that overcrowded rental units are an issue in Santa Barbara, where over 50% of renters experience rent burden. At the same time, we understand the clarity from uniformity that comes from a relocation assistance defined per unit rather than per tenant. Yet, we must ensure that a relocation assistance provided per unit for an eviction that is of no fault of the tenants should be enough to ensure the tenants are not displaced from our community. Our relocation assistance proposal follows the already in place Tenant Displacement Assistance Ordinance, TDAO, Chapter 2889, providing what we believe to be the basic and minimum relocation assistance needed to protect renters in Santa Barbara of 4 times the median rent or 5 times the median rent for individuals with functional and access needs. The Tenant Displacement Ordinance already applies to 4 instances, including the demolition of any rental unit on a lot, the alteration of any structure on a lot in a manner that requires a permit from the city and which reduces the number of rental units on the lot, the conversion of a single residential unit to a condominium unit, and a change of use of real property from a residential use to a non-residential use that requires a permit from the city. As a result, to limit confusion and to promote uniformity, we propose that all no-fault evictions follow the same relocation assistance as outlined in the Tenant Displacement Assistance Ordinance. We are here promoting uniformity because in times of economic crises such as these, it is absolutely necessary for us to collectively ensure that we are protecting tenants in a way that prevents displacement of our neighbors and communities. Now more than ever, we must do everything in our power to prevent an avalanche of evictions and newly homeless families, especially during a pandemic. This pandemic is already a massive crisis in our community, and it will only worsen if we add another crisis, an eviction and homelessness crisis on top of it all. We ask that you seriously take this into consideration and protect your constituents and protect our communities. Thank you.
We're going to try again with Sherry Higgins. Sherry Higgins, please go ahead. Ms.
Hello.
Higgins, are you there? Hello.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Sherry Higgins. I've been a renter in Santa Barbara for 45 years. And I want to say I have a great landlord. I've rented for 15 years, but I'm not just with the same landlord. I'm not just thinking about myself right now. I'm thinking about many other people who have lots of people living in one unit who can barely afford the rent as it is. And I am calling to support the cause initiative to support strong community stabilization. And I'm also calling to ask that we protect our most vulnerable members in our community. And I'm suggesting that I'm supporting renter assistance, and I'd like to see the prevention of unjust convictions. And I would also like to see a stabilization of housing costs, and I would like the landlords to protect the safety and well-being of the tenant. So thank you for the time. And that's all I have to say.
Our next speakers are Aaron Bagary, Frederick Sutton, and Max Golding. Aaron Bagary, please go ahead.
Hello. Hi. It's nice to get a word in. I think that the number of landlords to non-landlords on this call is very much not representative of the Santa Barbara population. Anyway, there have been suggestions, I think, up until now that this is not fair to landlords. So I just want to say that, like, housing is a basic necessity for everyone. So, you know, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that it's a human right. And I think there's been some choice to adopt a system of like tenants paying landlords for the right to live, not maybe by Santa Barbara specifically, but, you know, by like the greater society. But like, that doesn't change the fact that housing is a basic necessity. And so I think, like, you know, if landlords are not willing to give up the ability to profit off of the need for housing by controlling all of the housing, which I suspect they aren't, then I think it only makes sense to also require that they accept some of the responsibility for ensuring that everyone can find housing, because we think that everyone should be housed. And, you know, that probably involve some expense on the part of the landlords. So you know, they may not want to do that, but that's why we have laws. And I think as they're currently written, I mean, obviously, as they're currently written, everyone is not finding housing, right? That's why we're having this issue. And so, I mean, I want to support the things that are currently being proposed. Just to address a couple other things people have been saying, I think that, like, none of these things apply to single family homes where, like, the person, the landlord is living there as well. Like, I don't think any of these things apply to any of those people. And then there have been suggestions that we shouldn't do this during a pandemic, that we should wait. I think that the pandemic is exactly the time when this is necessary. This is when all of the tenants are having issues with housing. So I think it does need to happen now. And then there's just also this, well, actually, I'm almost out of time, so I won't say anything more, but thank you.
Our next speakers are Frederick Sutton, Max Golding, Alan Gallegos, then Michael Bruce. Frederick Sutton, please go ahead. Frederick Sutton, please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Honorable Council, committee members, my name is Fred Sutton, speaking on behalf of the California Apartment Association. We greatly appreciate your deliberation on this issue. AB 1482, which passed earlier this year, has just cause and price gouging limitations and rent control statewide. I just want to make sure that that is reiterated, that statewide there is just cause and rent control in California. I also want to reiterate that housing providers are not in the eviction business. They're in the rental housing business. Evictions are rare and of last resort, a tool of last resort and one of the only tools available when there are irreconcilable differences. We've been a part of the Landlord Task Force that's been working on this for several years. This was always intended to be per unit, and we request that the committee look at bringing balance to this discussion. There are more nuances in here that need some refinement. That's why we asked that this get delayed to get some of these issues refined. But the basic discussion that's been going on is that it should be per unit, not per tenant. There's been a lot of discussion on the pandemic. Statewide, rental rates are decreasing and vacancies are increasing. It would be very interesting to see what is going to be happening to the rental stock around the University of Santa Barbara if people are not returning to school. We request that this committee bring reason and balance to this discussion and appreciate your deliberation. Thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is Max Golding, then Alan Gallegos, then Michael Bruce. Max Golding, please go ahead.
Oh,
Max
there we go.
Golding.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Hi, sorry, that last speaker and most of these kinds of landlord comments actually get me kind of flustered, so hopefully I'll stay articulate. So I'm a tenant, been a tenant for my whole life, grew up in Section 8, I'll probably never own a home. In support of the Community Stabilization Initiative, et cetera, Just Cause. I just want to say, so I was part of the Ivy apartment mass evictions like 4 or 5-ish years ago, and I still recall very clearly the image of when all of us as tenants who are, 90%-ish people who have to like go work really hard every day to make a wage that usually isn't a great wage, then give to a landlord in order to have a basic human need, shelter, like food, water, shelter. Shelter is a basic human need. We arrived at that meeting way back when, pre-COVID, when you had to go to city council meetings, and every single seat upstairs in City Hall was taken up by landlords. Why did this occur? Because the SBRPA, who is kind of orchestrating this like huge, weird sort of like landlords are victims narrative right now, with landlords coming in and saying like, poor me, I can't make as much profit. They got all of them to take up all the seating so that we literally had to sit on the floor downstairs when it was raining and it was cold and it was wet. And I'm not saying like boo-hoo, I'm saying like, this is the same exact thing. I'm watching the same exact thing happen. Like I've received 30-day notices, 60-day notices, like things where landlords were just trying to flip the property to make more money. This happened to me several times in Santa Barbara at this point. Ivy was just sort of like this massively public thing. So, I'm in a situation right now where I do have like sort of your optimal, like awesome, really nice, cool landlord, actually like below market rent, which is, this is the best situation I've ever had, having lived in probably over 10 different places over the last 15 years. So just sort of speaking, not like speaking for all tenants, but like the argument is just absurd. So I just, for the rest of you, like landlord type, like mom and pops to SBRPA told you to like, here's the talking points, here's how we get them, here's how we prevent the apocalypse from happening, whatever. Like seriously do some self-reflection and just consider that like, you're not a victim. Nothing being proposed here is gonna ruin your life. Like it's absurd and it's obscene and it's offensive. Many of us have actually had to live in our cars, or we've had to like couch surf for months at end. Like most of us have had to dig into our savings, like not having any money for any future to even put down a down payment on a mortgage to get into the situation that you guys are able to be in, because the laws were so much different and the economy was so much different when you were able to buy a home. And it's something that I just don't think you guys think about. It's not compassionate. It's not like a humane way of thinking about human shelter. So please just consider that in the rest of the sort of nonsense talking points you're going to be spewing the SBRPA told you to say. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Alan Gallegos, then Michael Bruce, then Kenneth Farrell. Alan Gallegos, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, I've been listening to the conversation today, and I really feel for City Council. I know that you guys, your hearts are in the right place. I know that there is an issue, and I spoke last week and said that, you know, part of the issue is we've been refusing to build and make it easy over the last couple decades or more. The other reason I feel for you is because if these laws are instituted, you're going to create higher price rentals, even on the low end, and less rentals. So people that don't need the income and are very, very wealthy will say it's too much of a hassle and leave it vacant until 10 years from now when they want to sell and the rates of the housing is more. So that's, you know, it's a big problem. I also feel for you because I'm a mom and pop. I'm a pop. And I have 4 units, and I had 2 units available during COVID, and I was a little worried. I don't like it when tenants give notice. But about 70% of the people that applied for my apartments were from San Jose, the Bay Area, San Diego, and LA. And because of COVID, people who can afford higher priced rents are moving where they would like to live. So you're going to lose more units during COVID to that. And some of those units might have been occupied by multiple families before, and maybe they're now going to people who are coming from out of town. It's a big problem. So handling this by penalizing the landlords who you know, yes, do you have your evil landlord that maybe it's a big property agency from LA? There are evil people out there, but it's very few and far between from what I can tell. How many people, do you have data on how many people can't find a place to live that are here? I mean, I haven't seen those numbers. Maybe they're in those reports. But I do feel for this situation. I do think it is important to right-side this. I think we need to look at vouchers. We need to look at raising the minimum wage. We need to look at, I mean, let's let 1842 or 1482, whatever it is, let's let it play out. It needs to play out. You guys may have come into this before that got passed. So let it play out. We should not be wasting taxpayer dollars and our time talking about this right now. Let it pay out. Let's study it and find out how to fine tune it, not overlay something that you guys were trying to do at the same time. So I do feel for everything, and I appreciate all your guys' work. I know many of you. I know your hearts are in the right place, but I don't want to make less rentals and more expensive rentals. People are raising rents because of these discussions. Thank you.
Our next speakers are Michael Bruce, Kenneth Farrell, Cindy Marcus, Maggie Wild, and then we'll have one more speaker after that. Michael Bruce, please go ahead. Michael Bruce, please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I, as a landlord, have been very sympathetic and extremely accommodating and fair, I believe very fair, in the past 32 years with the issue of rents. I maintain my units as if I were a tenant and have treated all my tenants in a very humanistic way. But due to the political pressure demands, which are seemingly headed towards rent control, I will proceed with rents using government guidelines, which are significantly more burdensome and higher than I have used in the past 32 years. I cannot stand by and not address government's interference with my property rights and business affairs. I pray that it were different, but I don't see any of the atmosphere changing anytime soon, either locally or statewide. The real problem is shortage of housing and not the landlords. I do not support the just cause eviction ordinance proposed by the city or the proposed community stabilization plan. I would like the city to let AB 1482 proceed and give it a chance without any further action. Thank you for your time.
Our next speakers are Kenneth Farrell, Cindy Marcus, Maggie Wild, then Matt Lowe. Kenneth Farrell, please go ahead.
Hi, Chair Gutierrez, members of the Ordinance Committee, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I do have a couple of notes, but listening to this while I was waiting to talk, I never understood that I was a member of such a heartless, evil, unbelievable, cold, calculating group as we're presented to be by some of the commenters. And it strikes me, one of the commenters before said it's a racial justice issue. And so I'm thinking about how prejudicial this really is, this process against the homeowners and landlords. And so that's, you know, something that'll be addressed, I'm sure, as we move forward. One of the things I would like to know, and I'd love to hear from you council members and the city attorney, how big really is the problem? Because certainly there are some organizations that are lobbying for the tenants. And I've heard that, you know, 65% of Santa Barbara residents are renters. Santa Barbara's population is 100,000. That makes 65,000 renters in the city. How big really is the problem that we're trying to solve? Is the solution bigger than the problem, or finding the solution? Another comment, I think I heard one of the callers say that they can't even move back into their own home without paying a tenant. And I think that not being able to move back into your home without paying a penalty is really kind of, is unconscionable. The next comment, and it's been made a couple of times, you know, housing is a small business. Landlords are investors, just like other business people who own grocery stores, delis, restaurants, an auto repair shop, gardening, any other service. And so the ordinance is being pushed down based on a comment that housing is a right. You know what? Housing is a necessity, but it's not a right. Food is a necessity, but it's not a right. Transportation is a necessity, but it's not a right. And so if you're going to impose legislation on homeowners, are you next going to go to grocery store owners? And then after that to people who have transportation, an auto dealer, you have to give a car to somebody because they have to get around somewhere. And you know, a real quick other comment, the downstream impacts of what you're going to be doing. You know, if we have to give money to a tenant to move out, then that money should be something we can claim as a deposit up front. At the end, we give them a free month's rent, we give them the deposit back, they have that money to move. I don't think you need to take action beyond that. Thank you very much.
Our next speakers are Cindy Marcus, Maggie Wild, Matt Lowe, and Kim Paskowitz. Cindy Marcus, please go ahead. Cindy Marcus?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm also opposed to this ordinance because it is putting too much burden on the mom and pop landlords. And I want to speak to the tenants who have kind of stated that landlords should be the ones that have to deal with this and pay for the tenants and all this stuff. I think they don't understand business. Landlords have to pay mortgages, taxes, insurance. It's not like an investment where you buy the investment and if you don't get a dividend, you know, it's that kind of a loss. You still have expenses to pay. You have to keep up the unit. You have to maintain, you have maintenance, plumbing, electrical issues, roofs, all kinds of things that you have to pay for. It's not an investment that just sits there and pays you or it doesn't pay you. You have expenses, you have things that don't go away. So for those tenants that don't understand this, I just wanted to address that. I don't think that the way to solve this problem is by putting the burden on landlords. I think there has to be another way to solve the problem. Affordable housing is important. I agree with that. I agree with the tenants who state that. This is an expensive place to live. there needs to be another way to solve the problem. Somebody said something about, selling it to tenants and apartment units to tenants in common. That's one way. Another way was to charge the tourists that come here and then, have that go towards affordable housing. They need to make it easier to build affordable housing. They need to have incentives to build affordable housing. There needs to be some other way to solve this problem. This is not the way to do it. Putting the burden on landlords, you're just going to, and putting limits on the rent. The rent, it has to be proportionate to the expenses. Otherwise, people can't do this business. So there needs to be some creative way to solve the problem, and this is not it. So that's just what I wanted to say, and I hope that there are a lot of creative people in this town. I hope they will use some of those brilliant minds to solve problems that are real problems. I agree, there's a real problem in housing here. So, and I am a realtor, I am in the housing business. I see both sides, and it needs to be solved, but this is not the way to do it. There's a lot of very smart people here. Use those minds and solve this problem. Thank you.
Our next speakers are Maggie Wild, Matt Lowe, then Kim Paskowitz. Maggie Wild, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to say to the landlords listening in that you need to know that you're not, as you say, providing a service to our community. Landlords inherently profit off the labor of the working class. So release your God complex of giving housing when really you're withholding housing. If you sign up to be a landlord, which is an investment you chose to make with your disposable income, that investment comes with risks. My father is also a so-called mom pop landlord who chose property as a form of investment, and if he chose to displace someone from their home during a pandemic, he should be responsible for helping them relocate, as he is taking away their house. Housing is a human right, and if you're acting as a good landlord, this isn't even an ordinance that you would have to worry about. A lot of landlords are saying we should wait to see how the original ordinance works out, but this isn't something we have time to wait on. People are being forced out of their homes and communities every day. How are you supposed to shelter in place if you're being forced out of your home? We know that a huge portion of our renting population in Santa Barbara is Latinx, and we also know that COVID is disproportionately affecting Latinx communities. This is a racial justice issue. I urge you to act in solidarity with the renters of our community and implement relocation assistance and community stabilization and the community stabilization initiative. I yield my time.
Our next speaker is going to be Matt Lowe, then Kim Paskowitz, Kathleen Jimenez, and our last speaker should be Lochelle Robinson. Give me one moment with connecting Matt Lowe in. Matt Lowe, go ahead and unmute your mic and go ahead.
Well, now.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Hi, Chair and Ordinance Committee. Thank you for hearing this issue today. I'm in support of the Community Stabilization Initiative. As you heard last week, I shared my story of displacement in the community, as well as other community members who have been have their families and friends displaced here in the community. On one hand, I can count numerous different people that have left Santa Barbara because of this very issue of cost of living and apartments and feeling displaced because of the rising in prices. So this issue is not is very personal to my friends and I. For me, I was displaced in COVID in April, and I had the experience with many mom and pop landlords and property managers, and I experienced the discrimination from them based upon my disability. One, because they said I did not make enough. Two, because they said I could not live there, and they didn't have the appropriate amenities. One that I would like to focus on is not the amenities, because that's an ADA issue, but it's this cost of living one, saying that you don't make enough. These are the gatekeepers of our community, who gets to decide who belongs and who doesn't. And I think this is utmost urgent to have a community that says everybody belongs. Understanding that this is many people rely upon housing income for retirements and things like that. Understanding that that's a mortgage issue, and organize around your own thing. We're fighting for tenants here, and for people to be protected. This is a human issue. It's the issue of me having a place, a roof over my head, or being on the streets, and that is a very real thing. And so as we understand that, like, we want to put people over profit, that this is not saying that you can't own a business or you can't do housing, but it's just we need to have a little bit more tenant protection in the process, so that way we can have some community stability. We need to be one community together, and have this approach where we're seeing the people that are being displaced in our community, and hear the voices from them and what they need to have a sense where they belong in our community. So I encourage you to move forward on the community stabilization, just cause, and the CPI at 2%, which is a really important during depression times like we are in right now. Thank you for hearing this issue, and please move forward quickly because evictions are upon us. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kim Paskovitz. I'm going to connect her shortly. Give me one moment. Kim Paskovitz, please go ahead.
Hello, Council. I'm here to voice my support and ask that the Santa Barbara Ordinance Committee and Santa Barbara City Council implement a strong just cause eviction protection ordinance and the community stabilization initiative to provide tenants the protections they need to survive the growing housing crisis during this global health pandemic. There is so much uncertainty and fear in our community. I've witnessed a lot of tears recently in talking with friends who are renting in Santa Barbara. One of my daughter's best friends, both of her parents were COVID positive and could not work for a month, and they did not know how they would pay for rent. Other renters I've spoken to have not returned to work, or they have had their hours cut in half. I have also started hearing from families who have been evicted as well in our community. We need to center the needs of tenants during this global pandemic as they represent the majority of our community. We are on the brink of an avalanche of evictions, and we must prioritize residential stability. I ask that you harness every protection at your disposal to protect the 60% of renters here in Santa Barbara. To do that, we ask you to pass a strong just cause tenant eviction ordinance that provides adequate relocation assistance for no-fault evictions, that covers typical expenses such as first and last month's rent, security deposit, and all the potential moving costs. We ask that you support the Community Stabilization Initiative, which would cap rent increases to no more than 2%. And we require the committee to oversee the implementation of the law to ensure enforcement of its rules against excessive rent increases and unjust evictions. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kathleen Jimenez, then Lochelle Robinson. Kathleen Jimenez, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am opposed to this ordinance. I just found out about this yesterday. I knew nothing about it. I was born and raised in Santa Barbara, as were my parents. My sister and I owned the home that we grew up in after my parents have passed. We rent it out and have wonderful tenants, and we also rent under market. No, we are not rich. I don't think that we as mom and pops should be in the same category as these people thinking that everybody is rich and just getting it. We got this from our parents. We were going to use this for our retirement. And we have also been affected by COVID. We have a small business that has been completely shut down. So no, we're not rich. resent the fact that a lot of these people think all landlords are the same. We're not the same. We own this property and we shouldn't be put in the same category as these multimillionaires that do it for investments and all this money, because we don't know where our next paycheck's going to come from due to COVID. So I just want to go ahead and let you know that not all landlords are these terrible people that want all the money, because we don't. Thank you.
We can't
We
hear
have
you.
No, it's okay. We have two more speakers, Lochelle Robinson, then Lisa Harwin. Lochelle Robinson, please go ahead. Lochelle Robinson, please go ahead.
Hello. Can you hear
Hello.
me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to read an email I sent because I'm not really good at this, but I was going to say, hi, I'm an owner of a duplex on Isley Street for 34 years. I oppose the relocation ordinance. We just passed AB 1482. Let's give it some time to work. The relocation data study was based on per unit, as is AB 1482. So why per person proposal? And why, if I rented the unit to a family, would I pay per person relocation fees? This makes sense to me. To an owner, it's terrifying to me to think that I could be forced to pay many tens of thousands of dollars. You know, I can't really live with this hanging over my head. If this were to pass as is, I would definitely sell. It's just not worth it. There's a lot of us little guys that don't have that kind of money, and all the fuzzy language and terminology and some of this poorly written proposal is all in favor of, it's anti-landlord. My rents are a fully 24% below average, and my tenants are always long-term. My 2-bedroom has had 2 raises in her 9 years. My 3-bedroom has had 5 raises in the 19 years to the same family. These people are my friends. This is my income in old age and life savings. Just Cause discriminates against landlords, portraying us as greedy and rich. I'm here to say not true. And I'd also like to comment just briefly. I only have a little bit here, but this is the kind of person that I am, and the kind of person that a lot of my friends are that are landlords. I mean, I was born and raised here. We provide stabilization because just do the math. If your rent's just a little bit lower than average, people are going to stay. And that's been my philosophy. I've had this property a long time. And I really resent some of these people that portray us as being evil landlords and greedy. It's really not fair. So anyway, I know you guys will do the right thing. This proposal's outrageous. So I would ask you, excuse me, that you vote no. Thank you.
And our final speaker is Lisa Harwin. Lisa Harwin, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you today? First of all, Christine Sniden, Mayor Pro Tem, I want to thank you for your late night email in response. It was very kind of you. First of all, the first question to you and Megan, do you own rental property? And if you don't, please put yourself in our shoes. In the last week's meeting in regard to the relocation ordinance policy, it left me confused, baffled, flabbergasted, and worried. This ordinance presents astronomically high relocation fees and possible attorney fees for all tenants on or off the list. To me, this is vague and clearly needs more thought for fair solution. Last week, I heard a young woman spoke, and she said, "We chose our career." It saddened me for the lack of understanding. Even if we did or did not choose this as a career, we as property providers are feeling impacted by getting squeezed out of our career, our supplement income, our retirement, and potentially our home. It is scary. I have no pension. I have no Social Security. I am widowed. I'm nearing 60 years old. The thought of having to find work in a pandemic and youth-driven digital era to make ends meet is an unsettling feeling. I am fair and I'm a just landlord, and I always strive to do my best to make my tenants happy, and I keep a very safe, maintained environment. I want good tenants. I've had tenants use me, abuse my properties, breach contracts, and have looked for loopholes to work the system to get a free ride. Please, please consider the consequences this can have for the elders, the people who have worked relying solely on rental income for their livelihood and retirement. This is a lot of money to put aside for this ordinance cause. Along with our state, federal, and local tax agency liabilities, mortgage payments, insurance payments, property taxes, gardeners, maintenance, and all the other laws being imposed, it's squeezing us out. If we can't take care of things and get by, who then is going to sustain stability for us? We as landlords are citizens and also need financial and property right protections. We need your help. Please find solutions that will consider fairness and relief for landlords and renters. Thank you.
Chair Gutierrez, that was our final speaker.
Thank you. I'd like to now open it up to my colleagues for discussion. Councilmember Jordan, I see you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a series of questions that I think are for Mr. Cologne. It's a good number of questions, so it's obvious I think we're going to go further today. So, Mr. Cologne, the first one I want to address is your opinion last week versus other input we've heard this week on unit versus per person. And if that opinion you offered last week has changed, or you're still under the opinion that AB 1482 mandates that the relocation cost would be per person.
Chair Gutierrez, Councilmember Jordan, I think AB 1482 is ambiguous, and I don't think the issue particularly matters. Here's why. The definition of tenant in the ordinance means a person entitled to occupy the rental unit. One of the technical suggestions that makes great sense is to say that it's I'm at page 11 of the original package draft ordinance, and it makes great sense to add to that phrase, as does the city of Oakland, person entitled by written or oral agreement to occupy the rental unit. So the reason that I transposed unit to tenant was that the payment to unrelated adults and individuals in a unit can be complicated. Kaiser Marston did analyze things by unit, but they also analyzed by household. So the problem we are left to solve is this. Kaiser Marston's numbers are correct for a household in a studio 1, 2, or 3 bedroom. They are not correct when there are multiple households residing in a studio 1, 2, or 3 bedroom. And in order to resolve that, I put the payment as per tenant, knowing that would result in a higher per unit payment than Kaiser Marston's figures. I also acknowledged in responses to comments that that would call on the city to also include an adjustment mechanism so that a landlord faced with the circumstance of paying more than they thought was appropriate because of the number of people living there would have a way to petition the city for some relief. The other way to go with it, so that's where I was headed. Another option for the committee is to go back to per unit. And at that point, the legal issue raised by Ms. Roberson comes into play. I don't agree that the law is settled that a nexus study is required. I explained at some length in February of this year that in 2014, a federal district court in a case called Levin versus City of and County of San Francisco essentially said that a nexus study was needed. That case never was appealed, it was settled. Later, last year in 2019, in a case called Ballinger versus City of Oakland, the federal court came up with exactly the opposite result. The federal court said the city is not collecting this money. This is not a fee. This is a police power regulation to adjust the housing economy for legislative reasons. And so, like the city's council's power to set a percentage of inclusionary housing as a legislative matter rather than as a nexus fact-based matter, the most recent case law says that you can do like you did in the past, where in our tenant displacement ordinance, you establish relocation assistance as 4 months or $5,000 without a nexus study. Having said all that, back to Ms. Roberson, Ballinger is being appealed to the Ninth Circuit. The League of California Cities, the County Association, and all of the interested parties, ranging from the Apartment Association to the Western Center on Law and Poverty, will be slugging this issue out in the Ninth Circuit. So it makes sense to be careful and not exceed Kaiser Marston's recommendations by many multiples. When people talk about $70,000, $80,000, $30,000, those are the kinds of outrageous situations that an adjustment mechanism needs to be in place to address. So that was a very long-winded answer. I'll be shorter. I wanted to get that out at the outset, though, Councilman Jordan. Thank you.
So is the difference then now, if you were to include that a tenant is part of a written or oral agreement, the only difference between a tenant and a qualified tenant is a qualified tenant is the amount of time they've been in the unit, right?
That's correct.
And then if somebody waivers themselves out of accepting a lease, what is the remaining written agreement that exists between a landlord and a tenant?
You mean if the tenant is offered a lease on similar or the same terms and refuses it?
Correct. They want to live month to month.
And the question is, what's the remaining? They're in a holdover month-to-month tenancy, and again, depending on the nature of that tenancy or the place they're living, they'd be subject to AB 1482 or.
No, but is the identifier as the definition of a tenant, in particular for a written agreement? Once you waive acceptance of the lease and you're a holdover, is it the prior term lease, or what is it in current day after you waive renewal of the lease?
Well, the language I'm suggesting says written or oral. Yeah. So the rent would be whatever the holdover plus increase is. If
no, but to qualify as a tenant, according to your definition.
How long a term?
Nope. So first, let me just say, if I wasn't happy with oral agreement and I wanted your tenant agreement to be a written substance, and the qualified tenant is somebody that's lived there 12 months or later. And so now you have your definition of tenant and qualified tenant, and it's me. And now I decline to renew the lease and waive out of acceptance of a lease and want to use month to month. How do I qualify now as a tenant? So what I'm getting to is how does somebody know how many people are legal tenants in the building in the unit once you get past the initial lease.
Well, I'm going to sound dumb with this response, but I'll continue to repeat it. The city does not control how many people an owner or landlord chooses to lease to. And if I'm in that business, I would sure like to know who's occupying my property. So just again, from my dumb perspective, seems to me it's in a landlord's interest to have a written agreement with everyone who is in her property.
Okay. That would be, but the city does control what we're charging or assessing on a landlord in the situation right in the example right now on a per tenant basis. And that would, that control that the city is putting in place would be the legal recourse for either a landlord or a tenant. So the answer from a landlord standpoint would be to make sure that they have a replacement written document if somebody waives out of the renewal of the lease.
Yeah.
That'd be
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And incidentally, I want to make it also clear that the committee and council have full power to choose to do this per unit. I have no objection to that. I only raised the question.
That's kind of my next, that's my next question. So determining per unit versus per tenant, you would not find that less protective?
No, when I can display the table, but you'll recall that Kaiser Marston's numbers averaged out to somewhere between 1.5 and a little bit less than 2 months rent. AB 1482 requires the payment of 1 month's rent as relocation assistance. So Kaiser Marston's numbers are more protective.
Okay. And then do we, as a city, have any data on actual ownership basis for our rental stock? If it is held by what's being called mom and pops, if it's in an LLC, if it's a corporate, do we actually have data on that?
I don't.
Okay. And then could you tell me, walk me through what your definition of a single family residence in corporate ownership is? Is that truly a corporate name or a S Corp? That would be the only two situations?
Let me refer back to AB 1482. The purpose of that is to carve out protections, or rather the exclusions. So single family residences are typically excluded if the owner's given a notice under 1482 to the tenants that they are calling out that exclusion. So that's exemption H on page 4. It provides that a rental unit that is alienable separate from the title of any other dwelling. That's a long way of saying a single family home or a condo in most contexts. That's exempt from the ordinance entirely unless it's owned by a real estate investment trust, a corporation, or an LLC where one member is a corporation. So if Councilmember Jordan and his cousin, who is a natural person, have an LLC, they remain exempt. And that's a nod to property owners using LLCs to limit their liability to their investment in that property.
Okay. And there's no way a revocable or irrevocable trust would fall into that definition either, right?
A Section 856 real estate investment trust is not a family revocable trust for estate planning, if that's what you mean.
Yep. And then for what I'm calling a no cause eviction, do we have the ability, so not a cause of eviction that meets the 8 or 9 rules, 8 or 9 bullets to actually legitimately ask somebody to leave, but a no cause eviction? Do we have the ability legally to make that notice 60 days period, regardless of the time that somebody's been in the unit? And would that be seen as more protective rather than less protective?
I don't know, but I doubt it, because most of the timelines relevant to an unlawful detainer are in the part of the civil code that preempts our involvement. I'd be willing to look at that further if you'd like. In general, though, I would avoid trying to alter the timeframes around a tenancy or eviction.
Okay. And then,
and incidentally, just to be clear, there are 4 situations only where relocation assistance would be paid under the proposed ordinance. It's when the property has been reoccupied by family, or the owner, if a lease allows it. If the owner wants to go out of business by withdrawing the property from the rental market, if a government agency says vacate it, or if you intend to demolish or substantially remodel and it will be unusable for 30 days or more. So the only time we're talking about people paying is when they are taking the property out of circulation voluntarily.
so I asked this question and you gave me an answer I didn't understand. So I'll tell you my dumb question now.
All right.
One of those reasons is I just don't like you. Okay. That's not one of your 4 reasons. It's not a reason that qualifies as a legal reason, legal bullet to do it. I just am tired of you. You border on meeting one of the bulleted reasons, but you're smart enough not to. And I just don't want the hassle anymore. I don't like you. Is that an illegal reason to give somebody a 30 or 60-day notice?
Under current law, that would not be grounds for eviction.
Okay.
And the reason that caution is warranted there is that kind of statement is unfortunately historically been cover for discrimination.
Okay. And it'd be that determination would be further supported too by, I would generally think that most people are on a lease anyhow. And if you can't show that you're breaking the terms of the lease don't say, I just don't like you, right? So you're subject to the terms of the lease too, right?
Correct. Yes, when you're signing that contract, there's no requirement that you like the person.
Okay. And then some of the cleanup, I think you've mentioned, so I'll just give you what's on my list. Would that have to do with defining the age of a child?
Let me take them one at a time. So,
okay.
Yes, there are two issues that have come up around special needs. The way I've heard it from Mr. Sutton and others in the response matrix, I said that I didn't hear opposition to treating families with minor children as special needs. I heard a request that there be a separate special needs category for those kinds of people. So the technical cleanup would be to include a requirement that the child be under the age of 18. And I also heard public comment for the committee's consideration that it be limited to that the special additional payment be limited to during the academic year, although query what that means anymore with year-round
yeah
school.
It's really the only cleanup question I can find. I don't know what I've done with them. Then my last question just has to do on how this process will move forward. So help me if I'm incorrect. So we'll chat today about this. We might possibly chat another day about this, as it's almost 1 o'clock. You'll take that information and everything we've heard and our comments at some future day and go away. And then you'll bring that back for a cleaned up presentation and draft set of ordinance. And we will then have our shot at that to play with any final changes and recommendations to council, and then it will go to council. Does that sound right?
That sounds perfect, with one addition. I was somewhat taken aback by the comments today that what we're doing here is a surprise. The committee knows that the draft report was circulated between April 17th and May 15th for public comment. I would suggest inserting another public comment period between your deliberation and final consideration, so that the public and committee can see the results of the work I do before you hear it.
And then as you go through those steps too, what's concerning me is that every ordinance committee meeting is more public comment than actual questions or deliberations. So I'd appreciate it too if you'd offer some advice as we get closer to that point on when we can either say public comment for this section is over and we're going to deliberate then, and then the next time we talk about it, we'd have public comment again. Because there comes a point in time, it just seems like we don't get a chance to deliberate. So,
okay,
that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Very good questions. Madam Pro Tem Sneddon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. Isn't this the time for deliberation? Are we finished with, we've closed public comment, we've had questions, and now we can make statements? Is that where we are, Mr. Chair?
Yeah. Yes, I believe so. I think the point that Mr. Jordan was making was that there was quite a few comments from the public that there was not enough notice for the majority of the public to be aware of the situation. So I think he was suggesting and checking with the City Attorney Cologne as to whether or not we could have one more session to have the public have their chance to voice any concerns or questions about this matter before it gets to the council. Is that correct, Mr. Cologne?
That's exactly what I understood. So to the extent you deliberate today, I will make revisions. I will circulate those for public review prior to coming back to this committee, so that you'll have a fully ready to go process. And back to Councilmember Jordan, that would allow 2 more opportunities for public comment, first in writing, and then secondly, orally at your next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, I would completely agree with that. I think we need, if we err on any side, it has to be on complete transparency and opportunity for public input. I do myself also find it surprising that this has been since before April. I mean, April was circulated, and then for comment letters, and then long before that, we've discussed it at council. The fact that we've gotten over 300 emails in the last week, I think shows that people do know about it before today, and we've had 2 sessions of public comment, which I welcome, and I think it's really valuable. What we're hearing from the community, it has changed and shaped my views on some of the points. So I think that those are excellent points, and we'll keep it open. It affects the whole community, so the more comment, the better. I think we all share that view. So I can make comments now, or did Mr. Jordan want to make comments first? I don't know if he was finished with.
I have a few
Okay,
questions.
go ahead. Okay.
If you'd like to wait for comments.
Okay, I'm ready for some comments and to talk this through and then see if we can come up with well, whatever happens out of that. So I guess the first thing I want to say is it's painful to hear community divided. I think to hear one side pitted against another side, for us to be even seeing this as sides, especially right now, we're one community and we need workers and we need housing and we need mom and pops. We need the property owners who are renting out property. I think overarching everything for my perspective is how can we have that symbiotic relationship keep going and be fair on both sides, which may mean that no one perspective is all the way represented one way or the other. And I think we all understand that. But some of the language used, the terms evil or immoral, I just would like to steer clear of those types of terms. I also want to make the distinction between our mom and pops and commercial real estate, large units. I think we've done a lot of good work in our mass evictions ordinances and relocation assistance for that. And that was directly to respond to the Ivy apartments mass evictions and the disproportionate effects on people. So out of that came the discussion of, well, what is the state doing with just cause? What does just cause mean? How does this come about? And that discussion started, I mean, Randy Rouse was on the council when that discussion was happening. And we asked Mr. Kwan to come back and will tell us what just cause is, what it means from the state, how it's implemented. We had a lot of public comment at that time also. And then the timing of this particular meeting being 4 months into COVID, right when the tensions are the most extreme for everyone, for property owners feel the most uncertain about the economic impacts, their retirement, livability, all of these impacts, and renters are feeling panicked and the most uncertain about their futures. And on top of that, we're all worried about our health and the health of our community. So it is a very difficult backdrop to be even having this conversation. But I just really want to point out that we've been having this conversation all along in very publicly noticed meetings. We've had forums back when we could meet in the Faulkner Gallery. We did. We've met with different associations on all perspectives. I won't say sides, but from all different perspectives of this issue. And then came AB 1482. And I have to say, once the state came in and made it really clear what causes for eviction are, what the issues are, it framed the whole conversation differently as the whole state. And I'm actually, I thought that AB 1482 went further than we might have initially thought. And for myself, I was surprised, but also when there's unity like that, when everybody understands the rules together, it's more helpful to everyone that there aren't too many different rules going on. If I thought that 1482 was extremely lacking, I would have more of an issue. But right now, I think the state has 1482. We have 1482. There are a few little changes I would like to propose here if it's if we're in agreement. But I'll just say what I think might be helpful. So 1482, it allows for us to have a more protective local just cause. We know that. It sunsets in 2030, which is still a ways away, and hopefully the effects of pandemic will have, well, hopefully there's not a new pandemic to respond to by that time. It's really important. We had a lot of speakers talking about their own home that they could not move back into. These do not apply to single family residences, does not apply to ADUs, does not apply to owner occupied duplexes. Most of the callers who called in today and the letters we received about people who are saying, I can't pay $30,000 to relocate people so I can move back into my own home. This ordinance is not asking people to do that. It does not ask for that type of relocation. This is only for relocation for tenants who are in good standing, who have paid rent. I mean, the list of things, and I think it's worth reading them again, that, you know, this is only for the cases where a tenant has not defaulted on rent or breached the lease, is not a nuisance, has not destroyed property, has not had criminal activity or unlawful subleasing or refusal to allow the owner to enter lawfully or use the rental for unlawful purposes or failure to vacate. It's really important. This is just in cases where, through no fault of their own, a tenant is being asked to leave and needs to find other housing. I think it would be fair and reasonable in that case for a property owner to pay relocation assistance when it is not an expectation of the tenant, through no fault of their own, they need to be relocated. I think it needs to be per unit. I actually think that makes it so much easier and cleaner and clear that in the same way that you would refund a deposit, whoever it is designated on that lease, and you do it maybe at the time of signing of the lease, in event or who receives any refund, whoever it is, whether it's the deposit or if there's relocation or whatever it is, that's determined at the signing of the lease. There's a designee, and if they want to split it 5 ways and list 5 names, then those 5 names are on the lease, whatever it is, but per unit. I think the Kaiser Marston study, I'm glad we did it. It gives us something to work off of, but I think a fair relocation, and this is debatable, would be a month and a half rent plus the deposit. Remember, these are for tenants in good standing, so they should be receiving their deposit back anyway, and actually it's their money that they deposited and then getting it back. So it's not really a payment from landlords, it's really just returning a tenant's own money. And technically it should come with interest, but that's a separate point. A month and a half rent, and then I would like to request that there be an incentive for there being more notice. So if you can give a tenant 90 days notice, there should be maybe some incentive for that, that maybe you could have then flexibility on whether you want to waive the last month's rent as the way of paying it, or have it be that month and a half it paid the 50-50. But I think that should come with an incentive of giving more notice. If you give more notice to tenants, then you're eliminating so many of the hardships of being evicted, like storage costs, uncertainty, saving up for a first and a last and a deposit. I think what tenants could really benefit from is just more notice that this is going to happen, and then the ability of using that month and a half and having the deposit to look for other housing. The other benefit I think that there might be in doing it per unit, there are a couple. One, I'm really concerned that if you're doing it per tenant, you're going to have property owners, and it's a property owner's market. I mean, they have 100 applicants. I was hearing from one property owner the other day, 100 applicants for a unit. They get choice. So as a business proposition, why would they choose a couple or somebody with kids, or somebody who has older kids out of the house who might come back into the house, or multiple residents. And we all know that right now, families and people, roommates are doubling up, finding all kinds of creative solutions and ways to live in a household together. And I don't want there to be incentive for landlords to say, I don't want to allow that. I want a single tenant only with no family, no kids, no anything, no disabilities. That's another big concern that someone may, it's illegal, but discriminate against someone with a disability because they don't want to pay a higher relocation assistance. So I think it should just be one amount, and it should be tied to what the rent is. And the second incentive for that is that it may help to keep rents a little bit lower, because if a property owner knows that their relocation assistance, should they have to pay it, is tied to the amount of rent they're charging, they may want to charge a little bit less rent than have to pay that amount on the other end. Small incentive maybe, but it's better than the other incentive of not wanting to rent to families or multiple families or extended families or all the different situations. I don't, it's up to the landlord who's on their lease and who signs it. That's an agreement they make. Whoever's on the lease, that's how it gets distributed. And if you have people living there who aren't on your lease, you're in violation of the lease. And so that's problematic on a different level. So I think some of the things we've been asked to consider on whether this could be more protective or not, I think with AB 1482, the relocation is 1 month's rent. I would make that 1.5 plus return of the deposit. Again, because it's a tenant in good standing. I think a qualified tenant in 1482 is having lived there for 1 year. I would keep that. I don't think we need to make that shorter. Something that we've done as a council is implement mandatory leases. And this was a big change. We worked with the realtor community, with the renter community to come up with a way that could be acceptable. And it's a big change. We're still adjusting to that big change. And I think that helps. And then I think this issue of when the tenant receives the relocation amount, and again, I can't remind it enough, this is in cases where tenants are in good standing. This is not for single family residences, not for ADUs, not for owner occupied duplexes. So it's really not the mom and pops. It would be more commercial end. That they should be able to pay whatever the law says. We did just receive an email during this meeting having some question about if there are legal times when that payment would have to be paid back by, and that possibly landlords have a longer time till after. But I would like to incentivize that if you give enough notice, if you give 90 days notice, that that maybe then you can pay when the unit is vacated. So that's a choice that the landowner could make and that the tenant could benefit from. So I think those are my main points right now. We're a special community, and we really we need to be caring for everyone. And I think that something that we wouldn't want to happen is that the mom and pops who do tend to have better relationships with their tenants aren't forced out. I think that's a legitimate concern. And I don't want to get into who's wealthy or not wealthy, or value judgments on landlords or tenants as people. There are good tenants and good people, and there are good landlords and good people. It's about trying to make a balance. Again, for my overarching goal is for the stability of the whole community, So I'll just summarize that I think we just need clarity right now with so much uncertainty. Going with 1482 I think really helps everybody know what's going on and what the rules are. I would make the relocation 1.5 plus deposit, and with the incentive for a 90 days notice, qualified tenant staying at 1 year, and with flexibility on how to pay that relocation assistance fee with that 90-day incentive. And I think that's our all the comments I would make at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Sneddon. I don't need to match your very gracious and comprehensive introduction and reasoning. I pretty much agree with everything you say, except for a couple of details, but everything you talked about, the way this should be processed and worked through, I exactly agree with. So I agree it should be per unit. I think the definition of a tenant should be codified on a written lease or agreement. And if you're not on that, you're not a tenant. I like the month-and-a-half rent relocation idea. I think that kind of hits in the sweet spot of the study that was done, which was the multiplier was a little below 1.5 to a little above 1.5. So 1.5 seems like a kind of a gracious middle point. I'm concerned about the use of a deposit though, as going right back to the tenant before they vacated, as typically a deposit is the only means the landlords have to remedy a unit that was not kept up on its interior. It has nothing to do with the list of what a good tenant is or a good tenant isn't, because you may not know what the inside of that, how it's been treated up to that time. So I'm hesitant to include the deposit in that math. I would just prefer to do the month-and-a-half rent as the relocation expense. And in terms of the 90 days notice, that's why I asked about a requirement even of having to provide 60 days. I like the idea of making it into an incentive that if you can give more notice, then they have plenty of, the tenant has plenty of time to plan. You can give the money back when they vacate. I continue to be not really happy about the notice period being tied to a certain amount of days at which the money should be given to a tenant for the reasons we've seen in emails and the public comment that is that the tenant could just not leave, and you have now given the money to the tenant, and you're forced not only to evict the tenant, but you're also forced to chase down that extra money. Somewhere in the middle of those two is probably, is probably a balance point. I was thinking 50% of whatever the amount is upfront, and then 50% at vacate. So, we're going to get plenty of chance to discuss that going forward. So nothing for me is really set in stone right now. I like the idea of changing the phrase special needs to something else, whether it's special considerations or special dispositions, turning the definition of children in the household to those under the age of 18. And then I'm still pretty agnostic right now on extending the sunset date past the state date in 2030. I certainly don't see anything getting better in 10 years. Hasn't gotten better in the last 10 years. So I don't know why we'd want that up against us when we can just continue to tweak it if we need to, without having to actually renew the thing. One of the things I'd like to see run with that, of course, is staff alluded in the staff report last April that we would make a commitment to gather data on the consequences of either AB 1482 or subsequently our own local ordinance and resolution. And I think over the next 10 years, whether we sunset or not, that needs to be a part of this process to both remedy changes we need to make as unintended consequences happen, or to be ready when it expires, if that's the selection we're going to choose, so that we're making decisions at that time based on data and nothing else. I think I got everything on my wish list, so I'll just throw that into the bucket and we'll eventually get to see how that works out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Mr. Colon, I have a couple questions. When we're discussing people with special needs, how does a homeowner, a landlord, verify the special needs person? Do they have to somehow prove it, or what qualifies a special need?
Under the proposed ordinance, I believe is disability, the family requirement, and it's the definition. 62 or older, disability within the meaning of the vehicle code, or parent or guardian residing with, we'll change it to minor child. That's the proposal. I took some of it from your existing tenant displacement assistance ordinance, which has 4 months, $5,000 greater of for tenants, and for special needs tenants has 5 months, $6,000 as the relocation amount.
Yeah, I'm just wondering that how does a landlord go about verifying if a person has some sort of special need, or
the tenant would have to volunteer it and assert that right. We're not going to ask the owners to make personal inquiries of that nature of a tenant.
So legally, they're not allowed to actually, let's say, have them prove that they actually are special needs?
Well, I can't say that in all cases. There are some disabilities that are obvious and some are not. So some communication will have to happen from the tenant.
Gotcha. And is I think you already covered this. A landlord isn't necessarily forced to have every person on the lease. They could just have one person on the lease. Is that right?
Well, certainly a landlord would not need to have children on a lease. They're not capable of contracting, but a good business practice would be to have all adults who are occupying the premises be party to the lease.
But does the landlord have the ability to say, I just want one person on the lease?
I don't know directly. Again, the worry for me is that that becomes a proxy for discrimination against families, which is an issue. So there may be circumstances where a property is only fit for one person to occupy. I don't want to speak to all situations.
Okay. And with the discussion of being equitable to our community members, how much outreach to non-English speakers did the city do on this issue? Again, I know that this has been discussed for years, and I know that it was being discussed back in April, but what I'm wondering is, when that caller notified us that, you know, not too many Spanish speaking homeowners knew that this was something that was being discussed, it just made me kind of take a step back and want to ask how much of Spanish outreach or just non-English speaking outreach was done for the members of the community in relation to this issue.
Sure. Well, I met with a number of groups, including Cause. Frank Rodriguez represented that organization as working in a representative capacity for both undocumented and documented Latinx members of the community. In addition, I sent requests for comment to the California Apartment Association, Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, Santa Barbara Rental Property Association, and a few dozen other parties who had commented earlier in hopes of getting the broadest possible community support. I was not aware of an Hispanic or Latino-based owners association to contact, so I did not reach out directly to Spanish-speaking property owners.
Yeah. So I think it's a good idea for us to reopen the public comment period to allow more outreach for non-English speakers, because I don't want to just focus on Spanish speakers, because I've got neighbors who are from the Middle East, and I have neighbors who are from Asian countries, and they speak a variety of languages, and it just made me aware that I don't know if they know that this is happening, and it would affect them as well. I think it'll just be equitable. So if we do continue the item, when will it come back to Ordinance Committee?
The changes that have been identified are not terribly labor intensive. So if you give me some direction on how long you would like this circulated for public comment, I can give you an answer. I can be ready to circulate it for public comment right after Labor Day. I am hoping to get a week off while you're on vacation. I haven't had a week off in a long time.
So would that be September 1st or?
No, well, what I'm saying is my work would be done right after Labor Day. And then if you circulate it for 2 weeks to a month, I think we're looking at a mid-October date. I would be very, I think it would be appropriate, and I'd appreciate you setting the date today if you can. That always helps us notifying people.
Okay. Okay, that's something I can discuss with my colleagues in a minute. So to go for me to comment, thank you, Mr. Colon. For me to comment on the suggestions made by my colleagues, obviously there's a lot of unknowns going on right now in the world, and we as elected officials are trying to do our best to watch out for all of our residents, and sometimes it makes us have to consider some pretty tough decisions. So with that being said, I do agree with the points that have been said so far. I think everyone seems to be in agreement about the 1.5 months of relocation assistance and the deposit. Mr. Colon, actually, with the deposit, the landlord doesn't necessarily have to give back the entire deposit traditionally, right? When a tenant's leaving, they could keep just part of it to cover the cost of whatever damages were done. Is that something that could possibly be negotiated with the tenants if we decide to add the deposit with the 1.5 relocation assistance?
Yes, it is. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon's premise was that the people who get relocation assistance are tenants in good standing, and it would be less likely that they would have damage beyond normal wear and tear. So including the security deposit would be beneficial. I am imagining that the security deposit is probably a month to a month and a half. So as I understood Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon's comments, including the security deposit is probably within the range that KMA would authorize. I did not hear, though, Councilmember Jordan agreeing to that. So you may want to consider that in your comments.
Okay, and I believe they both agreed upon per unit. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. The 90 days notice time frame for the payment. I'm a little wary of that because that kind of, that's 3 months where the tenant might not be able to find a home because they don't have that relocation assistance. I believe Mr. Jordan suggested 60 days. I think 60 days would be a little better security for the tenant. I also liked his suggestion about the 50% up front and the 50% on the vacation of the unit. And yeah, so that's where I stand on those points. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. And so I'll respond to the updates there. And I think the deposit could be a separate issue. It may make sense to hold the deposit until the end to make sure that a tenant gets notice and doesn't decide that it's that they need to be upkeeping the apartment or something like that. The deposit really is something different because it is the tenant's own money that's being held. That should go back to them if it's just been normal wear and tear. So that we can remove that from the conversation. That's fine. And we're all in agreement about the per unit. 60 days versus 90 days. I think whatever notice is extra is beneficial. So I'm fine with that. The 50-50 structure could be really helpful. And I think that would be fine too. I would, the special needs, I agree, also needs to be taken out. I really do worry that it has the potential to be used in a discriminatory way. And I'm very uncomfortable with that. And also people defining their special needs, and some special needs are very visible and some are not. And I think, if you're relocating somebody, you need to just pay the amount that's owed to the people who are being relocated, and it shouldn't be a factor. In who you rent to is what I'm most concerned about. So I think those are all good changes, and I think I really applaud that the having it open again for comment period, and particularly reaching out to non-English speaking property owners who may not have been specifically reached out to for this conversation. And I think I really think that's a good idea. And so whatever after that is, I think are good considerations. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon. Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you, Councilmember Sneddon, for those compromises until Mr. Cologne tells me we can't do it. But thank you for that. And I think Mr. Cologne was waiting for a suggestion on the calendar too. So I would suggest through that last week of September, whatever the city would normally do, if you want to end it on Monday the 28th or Thursday, October 1st, because I think Friday the 2nd is a closed day for the city. That would be the length of public comment. You would agree to get it back sometime early in that week after the 7th, after Labor Day, and that would give us 3, almost 4 full weeks of public comment. If all that sounds good. Otherwise, I'm happy with the direction this is going.
Thank you for the dates. Then I'll need probably 2 weeks to compile the comments into a table and respond to them for you with the package. So that would put us towards the latter part of October, 20th or 27th, probably the 20th. Could we shoot for the 20th?
Sure. That works for me.
Okay, so I'm sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon?
Is that when it would come back to ordinance in October?
Correct.
Okay.
Fully baked with all public comments responded to, ready for your consideration and final.
And we don't see it again until that time. Is that
You will
correct?
see it when it's released for public comment on October 1st.
But not
Excuse
as
me, when it's released for public comment after Labor Day,
but not as a meeting, not as an ordinance committee meeting.
unless you want, no.
Well, I was just noticing that we have ordinance committees. The day after Labor Day, we don't meet, and then all the Tuesdays after that, we have ordinance committees already scheduled. So I just wanted to make sure that we didn't weren't overlooking that. But.
I think
Might I
we're-
go ahead? No, you go ahead.
I don't believe there's anything currently scheduled for October 20th.
Okay.
Might I suggest we start a little earlier than 11:30 on the 20th too? I mean, even if it's just 11, just to recognize we're going to start the whole discussion over again and reset, and I'm sure have tons of public comment, and so let's not box ourselves into another situation of running up against 2 o'clock and not getting to talk about it.
Good suggestion. I would like to start it earlier at 11 as well, if that's all right with everyone else. Okay, let's set it for 11.
I am capable of reading back what I've heard so far, if that would be useful.
Yes, please, Mr. Colon.
Okay. Number one, the committee has agreed to change the ordinance to charge to measure the relocation assistance per unit rather than per tenant. Number two, the committee has agreed to set relocation assistance as 1.5 months rent. That simplifies. We don't need to worry then about the size of the units. It's an easy metric. It's easy to state. Thirdly, the committee wants to clarify the definition of tenant to include only those tenants entitled to be there by an oral or written agreement. That's the city of Oakland's approach. The committee's opted for 1.5 months rent relocation assistance, no consideration of the deposit in that payment. And the committee has agreed to allow owners who provide notice of a no-fault relocation at least 60 days before the relocation happens to pay the relocation assistance when they're delivered keys when the unit's vacated rather than with 15 days notice. However, there was a reference to a 50-50 structure. So the way I'm hearing the motion, with 60 days notice, the owner would be entitled to pay 50% at the 15-day mark and 50% when the keys are delivered and the unit's provided in good condition. We're going to remove all references to special needs because of the risk of discrimination. So the ordinance will have a single amount for all qualified tenants. And then as a separate direction, we will reach out to non-English speaking property owners. That will take the form of a news release in Spanish and English, announcing the availability of comment. Lastly, as to timing, we've committed to have the draft out immediately after Labor Day. Comments will be accepted through Friday the 2nd. I won't look at them until Monday, Friday, October 2nd. And we will be back to your committee at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, October 20th.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Sutton.
Thank you, Chair Gutierrez. I agree with all of that. I think that was great to have that all summarized. Can I just ask a question? Can you speak to, in this process, the legality, the ethical responsibility, the how it is that council members communicate with individual stakeholders, so that if we're meeting with members of cause, or meeting with members of the Realtors Association, or meeting with mom and pop realtors or individual tenants, what are our public reporting responsibilities? What are our ethical obligations? What are our legal obligations? I think that'd be very helpful.
Thank you for asking. So in this process, you are legislators, you're creating new law. And that means that you're allowed to gather information from sources far and wide and in making your decision. That includes meeting with individuals for lobbying. The Brown Act, our open meeting law, specifically allows meetings with groups or individuals for the purpose of lobbying. It doesn't use that word, but that's the behavior it describes and allows. So I would say that the law expects you to gather information from a broad array of sources that you decide. That's to be distinguished from a quasi-judicial decision where you're deciding the rights of a single property owner. So here, this law that may be created will affect thousands of people. If you are adjudicating the rights of a small group or a single person, you wouldn't be able to take evidence outside of your public meetings. But as today has shown, the wide array of information you received with hundreds of emails from the public and with extensive testimony today made a difference in your legislative judgment. So to those who would restrict a council member's ability to write an op-ed or to have an opinion, I would suggest that almost any regulation that tries to reduce speech is wrong-minded under the First Amendment and likely unlawful.
Thank you. I think we all take this very seriously, and I appreciate that guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Sutton. Thank you, Mr. Carbone. Mr. Jordan.
And I just had to find my icon. I'm in agreement with all that, or everything that was said. So good to go. I'm just kind of listening to the chatter.
Sure. So at this point, there's no need for a motion. Is that correct? We just conclude the meeting with the notice that we will continue this.
No, I'd like your direction.
Oh, okay. Would one of my colleagues like to make a motion? Mayor Pro Tem Sutton.
So moved. As described and outlined by Mr. Kalan in the summary he just gave.
Thank you.
And I will second that.
Okay, thank you. Let the minutes show that Mayor Pro Tem Sutton made the motion and that was seconded by Councilmember Jordan. And I believe we're ready for a vote now, unless there's further discussion. Is there any further discussion? Okay, we're ready for a vote now, Ms. Clerk.
Okay, as described by City Attorney Ariel Colon, it was moved by Mayor Pro Sutton, seconded by Councilmember Jordan, that the meeting will resume on October 20th, 2020 at 11 a.m.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
Chair Gutierrez.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's participation and patience. And let's keep this conversation going, and we'll see you all in October. Thank you.